A lesson without pain is meaningless. But what if pain never came? Edward Elric would one day speak those words with conviction. But in another possible timeline, one born from a single successful transmutation, those words become a warning instead. A quiet truth whispered only in memory, inside a world slowly decaying from a debt never paid. The air inside the Elric home is heavy with grief. Two young brothers stand before a transmutation circle, chalk lines trembling under candlelight. Edward, only 11, stares at the inscriptions with intense focus. Alphonse, 1 year younger, looks toward his brother with trust. A lock of their mother's hair. A drop of blood. Notes captured from forbidden texts. A faded photograph of Trisha Elric sits beside them. Edward breathes in. "One more thing," he mutters. "This time, we'll get it right." No father beside them. No mentor. Only obsession, genius, and grief. They press their hands to the circle. The air falls completely silent. Energy ripples through the floor. The wind outside stops. But nothing breaks. No violent surge. No white void. No scream. No arm lost. No body taken. The transmutation completes. A human form takes shape. Warm to the touch. Fogged breath. Slow blinking eyes. Trisha Elric draws in air for the first time since her death. Edward stares in disbelief, then smiles through tears. Alphonse collapses around her, sobbing. In this moment, everything changes. But equivalent exchange has not been undone, only delayed. The brothers embrace their mother. She holds them gently. Her heart beats, but something in her expression flickers, distant. The boys do not notice. Edward laughs. Alphonse wipes his eyes. Somewhere beyond their awareness, in a place without form or walls, something observes. "Interesting," says a soft voice beyond comprehension. "You accept a gift without payment. Very well. A debt delayed is a debt multiplied." The voice fades. The brothers hear nothing. Trisha stands on her own, confused but alive. Truth has already marked them. In the original timeline, the failed transmutation costs Edward his left leg and Alphonse his entire body. Edward sacrifices his right arm to pull his brother's soul back from the gate. They begin their journey driven by guilt. They seek the philosopher's stone. They become state alchemists. Their suffering shapes their path. But in this version, no price is taken. They never lose their limbs. They never meet Winry as an automail engineer, only as a childhood friend. They do not enter the military. They do not become the full metal alchemist and his armored brother. Their journey does not begin in desperation, but in triumph. And for a time, the world is quiet. Months pass. Trisha regains strength. Edward and Alphonse continue to study alchemy obsessively, convinced they have surpassed the limits of the art. Their research accelerates. They no longer fear the gate. But subtle distortions begin to manifest. Chemical ratios shift slightly. Alchemic compounds react unpredictably. Weather patterns grow inconsistent. Time itself feels misaligned in small ways. Small animals near the countryside vanish without a trace. One evening, Edward stares into a basin of water. For a moment, his reflection blinks before he does. He stumbles back. Alphonse does not notice. Later that night, their mother coughs violently, gasping for air. It lasts 3 seconds. During those 3 seconds, her lungs produce no sound at all. Truth has not forgotten. Edward sits at a desk, writing in his journal. Alchemy is predictable. Every reaction demands a cost. But nothing was taken from us. He pauses, then writes, which means something still will be. Days become weeks. Edward and Alphonse intensify their alchemic studies. They believe they have discovered a breakthrough that could redefine the science altogether. Their mother supports them as best she can, but her health fluctuates. Some days, she is radiant. Others, she seems to forget details from years before. She smiles through it, unaware that her memory fades in fragments. The brothers test advanced alchemic reactions. At first, they replicate their success flawlessly. But soon, inconsistencies emerge. A transformation that should produce clean copper results in brittle residue. Water purification fails to remove impurities entirely. Edward assumes calculation error. He rewrites variables. The result worsens. "That's impossible," he mutters. "I know this formula." Alphonse watches silently. "Brother, maybe we're missing something." That night, their lantern flickers despite no wind. The flame arcs sideways for 3 seconds before correcting itself. Behind them, a clock ticks in reverse. They turn. It is normal again. They do not speak of it. Edward redoubles his efforts. If we can achieve human transmutation without cost, then smaller reactions should be trivial. Something else is interfering. He does not yet understand that the interference originates from their own violation. Miles away, reports begin circulating among local traders. Farmland fails where soil was once rich. Crops decay at irregular rates. Some fields rot overnight. Others overgrow unnaturally. Livestock refuse to eat certain grains, as if instinctively aware of imbalance. Travelers claim the sun rose 3 minutes late on one morning, though official timekeeping disagrees. Children in the nearby village wake from nightmares they cannot describe. One paints a dark silhouette with a toothless smile. The brothers remain focused on alchemy, unaware the laws they disrupted are foundational to existence itself. One evening, Alphonse stares at their original transmutation diagram. "Brother," he asks gently, "when we brought Mom back, did we ever wonder what came in return?" Edward hesitates. Equivalent exchange doesn't care what we wonder. If the world took nothing, then we earned it. Alphonse lowers his eyes. "Or it hasn't collected yet." Edward says nothing. In Central Command, Colonel Roy Mustang reviews minor irregularity reports. He sees no connection and discards them. Without Edward joining the state alchemists, Mustang has not encountered the prodigy with the iron will, nor formed the silent pact that would later influence the promised day. Nothing significant draws him to the Elrics. In this timeline, Edward and Alphonse remain unknown. Winry visits occasionally. She notices her Aunt Pinocchio staring too long at Tricia, as if unsure whether she is looking at someone living or something copied. Once, Winry hears Pinocchio mutter under her breath, "She's warm, but colder than before." She never explains. Tricia watches Edward train. "You should rest," she says. Edward forces a smile. "I don't need to rest. I need to understand." She nods slowly, but her eyes drift. She looks toward the window for several seconds before realizing she hadn't blinked. That evening, Edward writes, "The more I refine the circle, the less predictable the output. Patterns are emerging that should not exist. Some reactions terminate early, as if time were interrupted." He pauses. "I looked at the water again. My reflection appeared delayed. It felt like something was observing me through it." Outside, wind begins to blow in cycles of precise seconds, 7 on, 7 off. No natural force matches this rhythm. Animals flee south. And then, the first physical rupture occurs. Edward tests a metallic transmutation using a standard catalyst. The circle activates normally, but for the briefest instant, the material inside deforms in ways that defy known structure, folding inward, then reappearing perfectly shaped. Alphonse gasps. "For a moment, it looked like it was somewhere else," he says. Edward stares at the matter. "That couldn't have been a dimensional breach. We didn't go near the gate." Alphonse meets his gaze. "Maybe it came near us." Silence. Across the country, alchemists report similar distortions. Their theories point to disrupted equilibrium. Senior researchers whisper of the possibility that the principle of exchange is destabilizing. None understand why. In a chamber beyond perception, Truth watches with silent interest. Their success was genuine, the voice murmurs. They performed the act. But every act requires compensation. The universe is patient. The payment will not be their limbs this time. The balance must be restored through greater means. Truth pauses. Given the magnitude of their breach, the cost must equal what was defied. They restored one life, violating order. So the toll shall be measured in life. Not theirs alone, but the life of the world around them. Edward closes his journal that night. He whispers to himself, "I can feel it. Something is waiting." Alphonse responds, "Waiting for us to admit we were wrong?" Edward nods once. "Or waiting for the moment to make us pay." Days pass, and the dissonance in the world grows. The brothers continue their research obsessively. They test multiple transmutation patterns, searching for a reason behind the inconsistencies. Instead of clarity, they find increasing deviations. Certain reactions require less energy than expected, others demand more than the formula calculates. It is as if the universe is altering the cost without consulting the equation. Tricia observes them working late. She sets a tray of tea beside them. Edward thanks her without looking away from his notes. Alphonse pauses, noticing her hands tremble as she sets the cups down. The tremor lasts only a moment, then stops. Later, Edward finds one cup filled with tea that has cooled unevenly. Half is warm, half is ice-cold. He stares at it for a full minute before discarding it without explanation. Alphonse speaks quietly. "Brother, when Mom touches things lately, have you noticed they don't react normally?" Edward answers, "Everything we touch reacts abnormally now." He immediately regrets his tone. Alphonse steps back. Outside their home, a traveler tells locals that he saw rain fall upward for 6 seconds before crashing down violently. No one believes him. But that same day, 3 farmers report warped compasses and livestock walking in precise geometric patterns before collapsing. Tricia awakens one morning unable to recall her son's ages. She laughs it off as exhaustion. That evening, she prepares dinner but forgets to cook half of it. She looks at the uncooked food and whispers, "That wasn't supposed to be raw." Edward hears her. He keeps silent. He records in his journal, memory distortion in post-transmutation subject. Occasional nonlinear temperature distribution. Emotional disconnection increasing. Possible instability of restored life. He hesitates before writing, further observation required before considering intervention. He closes the book before finishing the sentence. He does not want to write the word failure. In Central, small anomalies are detected in nationwide alchemic data. Victor Grumman, sharp-minded but outwardly aloof, reads the reports. He notes the rise in temporal instability patterns. His analysis never reaches Führer Bradley. Bradley dismisses concerns. If it doesn't threaten order, it isn't relevant. Führer Bradley does not know the Elric brothers exist in this timeline. They have not become state property. They are ghosts outside the military network. Their breach has gone unregistered. One evening, Edward attempts to transmute a damaged tool into working condition. The reaction completes early, producing not a repaired tool, but a perfect replica of the original, a tool identical down to microscopic imperfections. The reaction uses no material from the damaged item. Edward drops it. His hands shake. "That wasn't restoration," he says. "That was duplication." Alphonse whispers, "Equivalent exchange has stopped balancing input and output." Edward nods slowly, which means it's balancing somewhere else. Silence fills the room. Their mother enters. She smiles weakly. For the first time, Edward sees it clearly. The skin beneath her eyes seems subtly transparent. Her breath leaves no condensation on a cold pane of glass. He looks at Alphonse. Alphonse nods once. That night, they discuss the unspoken. Edward begins, "We brought her back." Alphonse answers, But she doesn't belong here. Edward's voice breaks. She is our mother. Alphonse replies, Brother, I know. But if the universe is correcting itself, it won't take just her. It will take everything. Edward stands. We will find a solution before that happens. Alphonse asks, Are you sure one exists? Edward says nothing. Outside, wind stops blowing entirely for 81 seconds. During that time, no sound is recorded by weather instruments for a radius of 20 kilometers. Birds fall silent. Crickets cease chirping. Local clocks skip exactly 1 second forward at midnight. The Elric brothers observe this phenomenon. Edward writes, Temporal silence detected. Possible recoil effect from non-compensation of exchange. Entropic redistribution increasing speed. He finally writes the word. Failure. Later that night, Tricia walks outside. She gazes at the stars for too long. Edward sees her through the window. She stands perfectly still for over 10 minutes. When she returns inside, her pulse is irregular, alternating between accelerated and delayed rhythm. The next morning, Edward finds her staring into a mirror. She touches her face gently. Do you feel like yourself? Edward asks. She answers, I feel like what someone remembers of me, not what I am. Edward cannot respond. In his journal he writes, Subject exhibits awareness of non-authentic presence. Alphonse reads over his shoulder. Brother, are you writing about our mother like a study? Edward closes the book. If I don't write it, I can't face it. Alphonse places a hand on his shoulder. If we don't face it, we can't fix it. That night, they speak openly for the first time. Edward says, We need to consult someone about this. Alphonse asks, Who can we trust? Edward answers, Someone who understands the consequences of war. Someone who won't accept lies. Alphonse pauses. Colonel Mustang? Edward nods. Even if he doesn't know us here, he will listen. They prepare to leave. Outside, the sky cracks with thunder. But there are no clouds. The Elric brothers travel toward Central, leaving Resemble at first light. Their mother watches from the doorway. She raises her hand in farewell, but her movement is delayed by a second, as if the gesture belonged to someone remembering how to wave. Edward notices. He looks away before Alphonse sees his expression change. They do not tell her when they will return. They do not promise that they can. The journey is unsettling. Trees along the road angle slightly toward the sun, bending more aggressively than natural growth allows. Birds migrate in patterns forming perfect geometric shapes before scattering. Alphonse observes each anomaly. Edward records them silently. Neither speaks of the unnatural detail that none of their footsteps leave prints for the first 10 minutes of travel. In Central, they request an audience with Colonel Roy Mustang. He has no reason to prioritize two unknown teenagers, but the urgency in their message reaches his desk. Something in the briefing catches his attention, the mention of controlled human transmutation. He orders a private meeting. Mustang enters his office and finds Edward and Alphonse standing before him. He studies their appearance. Youthful, composed, eyes weighted by something beyond their years. Mustang begins. I don't know you. Why would two civilians request my attention and cite classified theory? Edward answers, because we did something we shouldn't have. And the consequences are spreading. Mustang narrows his eyes. Explain. Edward does not hesitate. We brought back our mother. Using alchemy. And no price was taken. Mustang leans back slowly. His voice remains even. That is impossible. Edward meets his gaze. Yes. And yet it happened. Mustang studies Edward's expression, then glances at Alphonse. You believe him? Alphonse replies. I was there. Mustang remains silent for several seconds. In that moment, the glass of water on his desk ripples. Not from movement. From stillness. Every molecule shifts outward before returning. Mustang notices. He says, "Water doesn't distort without vibration." Edward answers, "It does when natural laws are destabilizing." Mustang considers his next words carefully. "If what you're saying is true, then you've violated the core principle of alchemy." Edward responds, "We didn't evade the cost. We postponed it." Alphonse adds, "And now it's spreading beyond us." Mustang's eyes narrow. "How severe?" Edward answers, "The world is beginning to correct our mistake." Mustang stands and closes the blinds. "Explain everything. In order. Leave nothing out." The brothers detail the transmutation and the anomalies. Mustang listens without interruption. When they finish, he remains silent for 12 full seconds. Then he says, "If equivalent exchange collapses, this nation will collapse with it. Alchemy is the foundation of our military structure. If its balance is compromised, every weapon, every defense, every infrastructure layer will destabilize." Edward replies, "Not just alchemy. Reality, time, energy, biological form. They're all responses to exchange. If that law breaks, everything breaks." Mustang nods slowly. "You two are the cause. And you are also the only ones aware of the problem." Alphonse asks, "Will you help us?" Mustang answers, "If your report is true, I don't have a choice." Outside his window, leaves fall from a tree. Each leaf lands in the exact same position on the ground, forming a perfect circle. Mustang watches briefly, then turns away. That night, the brothers return to their lodging in Central. Edward lies awake, staring at the ceiling. Alphonse sits by the window. Alphonse says softly, "Brother, do you think he believes us?" Edward answers, "He believes the world more than us. And the world is already proving us correct." Alphonse remains silent. Edward continues, "We asked for help. But ultimately, we have to resolve this ourselves." Alphonse nods. "Can it be resolved?" Edward turns toward his brother. "It has to be. Or the universe will do it for us." Meanwhile, in Resemble, Trisha Elric stands before a mirror. Her reflection moves half a second after she does. She raises her hand. The reflection does not follow immediately. Her pupils dilate unevenly. She whispers, "Am I still here?" For a moment, the reflection smiles gently. "Not fully. Just enough." Then it disappears. She gasps and steps back. The mirror shows only her real expression now, shaken and confused. She tries to call out to her sons but cannot remember their names for 6 seconds. The following morning, Pinocchio visits and finds Trisha sitting outside, motionless in the rain. She asks, "You'll catch cold. What are you doing?" Trisha answers, "I'm waiting for something to take me back." Pinocchio stands in silence. Rain stops falling mid-air for 3 seconds before hitting the ground all at once. Across Amestris, transient distortions intensify. Wells yield water that evaporates without heat. Certain regions experience mirrored landscapes for brief intervals, where objects appear duplicated in momentary reflections of places that do not exist. Animals congregate around seemingly random locations, then scatter without reason. Mustang briefs Riza Hawkeye in private. She asks, "Do you believe them?" Mustang replies, "There are 2 possibilities. Either they are lying, or reality is." Riza answers, "Reality doesn't lie." Mustang nods. "Which means they are telling the truth." Riza asks, "What do we do?" Mustang says, "We find a way to restore balance before the world tries to restore it violently. In a place where form does not exist, truth watches. Its voice echoes without sound. They begin to understand. Truth pauses. The debt has not yet been collected." A second voice, colder, distant, faintly resonant, whispers, "Soon." The next morning, Edward and Alphonse return to Resemble with urgency. They find their mother sitting silently at the kitchen table. Her hands are folded neatly, but her posture is unnaturally still, as if she is waiting for instruction rather than acting from instinct. Edward kneels beside her. "Mom, we're back." She turns her head slowly. Her eyes focus on him a moment too late. Her voice is soft. "Edward. Alphonse." She smiles faintly. "I'm glad you're here." Edward notices her breathing does not match the rhythm of her speech. Air enters her lungs half a second after words escape her. He glances at Alphonse. Alphonse looks away. That evening, she prepares dinner, but forgets to light the stove. She places uncooked food on the table without understanding why Edward stares at it. He whispers, "You didn't finish." She seems confused. "I thought I did." Edward reaches out to touch her hand. Her skin is warm, but there is no pulse beneath his fingers. He pulls back instantly. She hides her hands beneath the table. Outside, Pinocchio watches from the doorway. She does not enter. Edward writes in his journal. Subject's biological functions no longer correlate with physiological output. Warmth present without cardiovascular activity. Indicators point to incomplete restoration. Instability progressing. Alphonse reads the entry. "Brother, don't call her a subject." Edward looks at him. "If I don't, I can't bear what I'm writing." They fall silent. That same night, across Amestris, the first catastrophic event occurs. At 2:14 a.m., seismographs register a momentary fluctuation in the planet's magnetic field. In one mining district east of Central, every metallic object within a 2-kilometer radius liquefies simultaneously, then reverts to solid form instantly. No mass was displaced. No heat recorded. But 32 workers witness the distortion before losing consciousness. When they awaken, each reports the same visual anomaly, a featureless white expanse and a pair of dark eyes without a face behind them. Officials attribute the incident to an unknown gas release. Mustang reads the classified report and marks it with one word: accelerating. Meanwhile, in the northern mountains, Van Hohenheim opens his eyes. He stands alone before a fire. His body trembles briefly, not from cold, but resonance. His connection to the philosopher's stone within him vibrates unnaturally. He whispers, "Something has disturbed the balance." His breath remains visible 3 seconds after exhalation. He extinguishes the fire immediately and begins packing his belongings. "It can only be them," he says. "They tried again." He travels south. Back in Resemble, Tricia begins losing time. She walks from one room to another and forgets why she moved. Once, she stands in front of the sink for nearly 20 minutes, with water running over her hands without soaking her skin. Edward approaches. "Mom." She turns. "Yes." He nods toward the faucet. "The water." She looks down. The stream passes through her palms without resistance, as if she is no longer entirely solid. She whispers, "I think the world doesn't recognize me." Edward cannot speak. That night, he writes, "We did not restore life. We forced imitation. The universe is attempting to correct it by removing the anomaly. But because the principle was broken, the correction is not precise. It is expanding." Alphonse sits beside him. "We have to take her back to the circle." Edward turns sharply. "We won't lose her again." Alphonse answers gently, "Brother, we never truly got her back." Edward stands. "I will not reverse this." Alphonse looks at him. "Then the world will." They do not continue the argument. In Central, Mustang compiles a private dossier containing anomaly reports, categorized by distortion type. He classifies them under one label: exchange instability. Riza enters. "Is this sanctioned?" Mustang replies, "No." She asks, "Is it necessary?" He nods. "Yes." He locks the file. If the higher command learns the truth prematurely, they will attempt to weaponize it. We must resolve this before anyone else understands its potential. That evening, Edward and Alphonse sit with their mother. She hums softly, but the melody repeats incorrectly each time. Edward listens closely. He realizes the song loops in sequences of 6 notes before restarting, ignoring the 7th. A perfect rhythmic mismatch to natural human memory. He glances toward the window. The sky outside is clear, but for a moment, he sees a black silhouette standing against the horizon. No features, just the sense of something observing. He blinks. It disappears. Alphonse whispers, "Did you see it?" Edward replies, "Yes." Alphonse asks, "Was it real?" Edward answers, "If it's watching, it's real enough." That night, Trisha wakes from sleep without a heartbeat. She breathes, but no pulse registers. She looks at Edward with quiet resignation. "I think I was supposed to stay gone." Edward kneels beside her. "You're our mother." She nods slowly, then says, "But not the real one." Silence. Alphonse stands behind them. Truth's voice echoes faintly in Edward's mind. "You asked for life without loss. You delayed your suffering. But suffering delayed is suffering multiplied." Edward closes his eyes. A tear falls. Alphonse whispers, "It's time we accept what we did." Edward nods once. "We leave at dawn." At dawn, Edward and Alphonse leave Resemble with their mother. She walks between them, her steps light, too light. Edward notices her footsteps make no sound, even on gravel. Alphonse avoids acknowledging it. They do not look back at the house. As they walk, the temperature fluctuates rapidly. The air grows warm under a cold sky, then cool again without warning. Edward checks his pocket watch. The seconds hand moves normally, then freezes for 3 seconds before resuming at double speed. He closes the watch and says nothing. Alphonse glances at their mother. Her skin glows faintly under morning light, as if reflecting something the sun does not emit. Her shadow trails behind her, but for a moment splits into 2 distinct shapes before merging back. They continue walking. Several kilometers from the transmutation site, the ground beneath them shifts slightly. Grass turns gray for several meters before regaining color. Trees along the path bend toward the brothers, their leaves rustling in the absence of wind. Alphonse whispers, "It's worse away from the house." Edward replies, "The house was stable because it was close to her original burial site." Alphonse nods. "The further we move, the more reality measures the deviation." Edward responds, "We're carrying the anomaly with us." They walk in silence. At midday, they reach the outskirts of the area where their original transmutation took place. Edward pauses. He can still see the faint remnants of chalk lines in his memory. Trisha stops beside him. She looks at the hill. "I remember being there," she says softly. Or, "I remember you being there. I'm not certain which." Edward places a hand on her shoulder. Her form flickers for a moment, appearing nearly transparent before stabilizing. Alphonse steps forward. "We need to be at the exact location." They climb the hill. When they reach the top, Alphonse stops suddenly. A man is standing beside what was once the transmutation circle. Tall, weathered, eyes reflecting centuries of burden. Van Hohenheim. Edward freezes. "Father." Hohenheim turns toward them. His expression is heavy, almost disappointed rather than surprised. "You did it again," he says. Edward clenches his fists. "You weren't there to stop us." Hohenheim nods slowly. "You're right. And this time, the consequences go beyond you." He walks toward Trisha. She watches him with quiet recognition. He studies her silently, then speaks. "You aren't my wife." She answers softly, "I know." Edward steps forward defensively. "She's our mother." Hohenheim's voice deepens. "She is what remains when you force life upon matter without balance. She is memory given shape. That is not the same as life." Alphonse's voice trembles. "Can she be saved?" Hohenheim shakes his head. "She was never fully here to save." The air grows still. Hohenheim continues, you did not violate nature. You hijacked it. And now it is recalibrating not just her fate, but existence itself. Edward asks, what do we do? Hohenheim looks at both sons. The debt must be paid. Edward replies, we'll give the equivalent. Hohenheim answers, you cannot. What you took was not a life. You took finality. You defied closure. The cost is now measured in entropy. Tricia catches his arm. Are you saying, it will take all of us? Hohenheim nods. Unless the ones who caused the imbalance surrender everything that defines their existence. Edward steps forward. Then take me. Alphonse interrupts. No. Take us both. Hohenheim stares at them. That may not be enough. Edward hesitates. What do you mean? Before Hohenheim answers, the ground trembles. The transmutation site glows faintly without being touched. Grass disintegrates and reforms continually. Stones levitate inches from the earth before collapsing. A low resonance fills the air. Tricia steps back. Her outline blurs further. She speaks softly. It's calling them. Edward looks at her. Calling what? Hohenheim answers. The eyes behind the gate. Alphonse turns. Truth. Hohenheim nods. It is no longer waiting. Suddenly, the air splits, just slightly. Not as a visible tear, but as a moment where space folds. For a fraction of a second, a white silhouette appears beside Edward. No face. Just presence. A voice echoes without sound. You succeeded without sacrifice. The silhouette drifts toward Tricia. You borrowed what was lost. Then toward Edward. You denied the consequence. It pauses. But consequence does not disappear. Edward stares into the distortion. Then tell us what we must give. The presence answers. You must give the thing you believed was exempt. Alphonse steps forward. What is that? A breath of silence. Yourselves. The distortion fades. Edward turns to Hohenheim. Is there no other way? Hohenheim answers. There is another way. But it is worse. Alphonse asks. How? Hohenheim looks toward the sky. If you refuse to pay, the universe will break, piece by piece, until there is nothing left to correct. Wind begins to rise. But all the trees are perfectly still. Wind rises across the transmutation site, yet not a single tree moves. The air presses against Edward's lungs as if gravity briefly shifted inward. Tricia's form flickers more intensely now, her edges blurred like a faded memory. She looks at her sons, wanting to reach for them, but her hands remain still. Edward whispers, there must be a way to stabilize her. Hohenheim answers, she cannot stabilize. She is a consequence, not a person. What you brought back is a recollection made physical, lacking the anchor of true existence. Alphonse shakes his head. She thinks she feels. Hohenheim interrupts gently. Because you believed she should. That belief gave her shape. But belief cannot sustain her against the universe itself. Tricia speaks softly. I know what I am, but I also know one thing is real. You are my sons. Whether I am memory or mother, I still care for you. Edward's expression hardens. Then we won't let the world take you. Before Hohenheim responds, distant footsteps approach. Edward and Alphonse turn. Colonel Mustang enters the clearing, coat trailing behind him, Riza Hawkeye close beside him. The air distorts around them as they step forward, as if recognizing their presence as a pivotal variable. Mustang studies the scene. We followed escalation reports, and every path led back here. He eyes Tricia. Who is she? Edward answers quietly. Our mother. Riza's eyes narrow. That's not possible. Alphonse speaks. It was. And that's the problem. Mustang looks at the shifting ground beneath his feet. Cracks appear in the soil, closing instantly. He watches stones rise and fall without force. The anomalies are accelerating. Hohenheim nods. The world is attempting to repair itself. But correction without direction results in collapse. Mustang asks, if the universe fixes the problem, what happens? Hohenheim replies, reality will force a reset, prioritizing equilibrium over continuity. Anything not aligned with the original laws will be removed. Ed understands instantly, including us. Hohenheim meets his gaze. Especially you. Alphonse looks toward the transmutation site. So our only option is surrendering ourselves? Hohenheim pauses. There is one alternative. Edward waits. Hohenheim continues. Truth does not desire destruction. It desires correction. If one of you willingly reopens the gate and offers more than what was taken, there is a chance to offset the debt. Mustang steps forward. Define more. Hohenheim's voice deepens. Not just the body, not just the soul, the entire existence. Memory, identity, influence. As if you were never here. Edward asks, for both of us? Hohenheim shakes his head. One is enough, but only if the surrender is absolute. Alphonse answers instantly. I'll do it. Edward steps in front of him. No. Alphonse replies, it was our mistake. Edward answers, it was my mistake. I led us into it. Hohenheim interjects. Truth will accept the one who acknowledges the weight of the action. Confession must be sincere. Edward turns toward the hill where the transmutation circle once existed. Then it must be me. Trisha reaches for him, her hand passing slightly through his sleeve. Edward, don't make this your only choice because you can't accept what you've done. Edward looks at her. It was always my choice. Alphonse steps closer. You don't have to do this alone. Edward answers softly. That's the one thing I can't risk. He turns toward the transmutation site. If there's a chance to save you, or at least end this without taking the world with it, I'll take it. Mustang watches with silent understanding. He speaks quietly. You remind me of someone. Edward looks at him. A man I once trusted, Mustang continues, who believed change could come without sacrifice. He was wrong. Edward nods slowly. Then I won't repeat that mistake. Suddenly, the ground convulses violently. A wave of distortion sweeps across the clearing. Trees invert for a single heartbeat, branches rooting into the ground, trunks twisting sideways, before snapping back into normal form. The air fills with screaming pressure, though no one hears sound. Trisha collapses to her knees. Her body pixelates at the edges, as if fading one layer at a time. Alphonse rushes to her side. Mom. She looks at him through dimming eyes. I feel myself unraveling. I don't know how long I have. Edward grips his fist. Then we act now. Mustang steps forward. Do you have a viable circle? Edward answers. We don't need one. He places his hand on his chest. The gate will answer directly. Hohenheim's eyes widen. Edward, wait. Edward kneels beside the point where the transmutation circle once lay. He places his palms flat to the earth. Truth, he calls. The air tightens. I will pay the price. Silence. Then a single phrase, quiet, omnipresent. Are you prepared to give what you valued more than anything? Edward whispers. Yes. The air fractures open, revealing a sliver of blinding white. Trisha reaches out. Edward. He looks back at her, eyes steady. A lesson without pain is meaningless. He turns back to the gate. But pain delayed is pain multiplied. The gate opens wider. And Edward steps forward. The gate opens before Edward, its surface shifting like liquid light. White expanse. Infinite darkness. It feels colder than air, yet warmer than thought. A pull begins, not physical but conceptual. He steps forward, and the world outside fades. Inside the gate, sound ceases to exist. The universe compresses to silence. Edward stands alone in pure void. Then, judgment appears. A towering silhouette of featureless white, shifting within itself. No eyes. Yet he feels it looking at him. Truth speaks without voice. You chose to step forward. Edward answers, I came to pay what I owe. Truth responds, you owe more than you understand. Edward takes a breath. His voice is steady. Then tell me. The space shifts. Images swirl around him, not visions, but memories. Edward sees himself as a child, kneeling beside his mother's grave. He sees the night of the transmutation. The moment the circle lit. Her body restored. His tears. His triumph. The scene glitches. He sees the aftermath now unfolding, Trisha's fading form. The distortions. The world unraveling. Truth asks, why did you do it? Edward answers quietly, because I couldn't accept losing her. Truth remains still. Because you valued your desire above balance. Edward nods. Yes. Because you thought genius exempted consequence. Edward looks down. Yes. Truth leans closer. Because you believed victory without sacrifice was earned. Edward breathes in. Yes. Truth pauses. Then what have you learned? Edward looks up. Equivalent exchange isn't a limit. It's a law. It's the reason life matters. Because what we lose defines the value of what we gain. Truth absorbs the words. For the first time, it says, you understand. The images shift again. Edward watches Alphonse comforting their mother. Mustang preparing for possible collapse. Hohenheim carrying centuries of regret. The world trembling beneath unseen pressure. Truth asks, what do you offer? Edward answers, myself. Truth responds, that is not enough. Edward clenches his fists. Then take everything. My existence. My memory. Every effect I have ever had on the world. Let it be as if I was never here. Truth waits. Edward continues. But don't take Alphonse. Don't take her. End it with me. Truth speaks calmly. Equivalent exchange does not negotiate. It balances. If I remove you entirely, the path that led here disappears. Your brother would never have reached this moment. The correction would never occur. Edward hesitates. Then what do you demand? Truth lifts a hand. Not your existence. The space distorts. Your future. Edward blinks. What? Truth steps closer. You will remain. You will remember. You will carry knowledge of what you did. And you will live knowing that any moment of happiness you earn will carry the weight of the world you nearly destroyed. Edward whispers. Why that? Truth replies, because the true cost of arrogance is awareness. Edward trembles. So I live with it. Truth nods. Forever. Edward breathes heavily. Is that enough to correct it? Truth answers, only if it is accepted freely. Edward pauses, then says, I accept. Suddenly, the gate trembles. Outside, Alphonse runs forward, hand reaching toward the opening. Brother. Edward turns his head slightly. Al, stay back. Alphonse shouts, if you take this alone. Edward interrupts. This isn't loss. This is payment. Truth watches silently. Edward looks at his brother. His eyes soften. I'm not disappearing. I'm living with it. That's harder. Alphonse reaches for him. Then let me. Edward shakes his head. No. You already understood long before I did. That's why it must be me. Outside the gate, the world flickers. Trees pulse with rapid aging and renewal. Ground shifts between solid rock and fractured soil. Trisha falls to her knees, body fading, then stabilizing momentarily. Truth extends its hand toward Edward. The correction begins. Edward nods. Then let it begin. Truth places its palm over Edward's chest. The gate explodes with white. The gate erupts in blinding white, then closes silently, as if it had never been there at all. Edward stands in the clearing. He does not glow. He is not marked. There are no missing limbs or scars. But something fundamental has changed. Not in his body. In his presence. The air around him feels heavier. The ground slightly bends beneath his feet, not physically, but conceptually, recognizing him as a point of correction. Alphonse rushes to him. "Brother." Edward turns. His expression is calm. Too calm. Not emotionless, but controlled. Deliberate. His silence says more than his words could. Alphonse grips his shoulders. Did it work? Edward looks down at his brother's hands. They feel real. Grounded. Not fading. He nods once. The correction has begun. Mustang and Hawkeye watch from the edge of the clearing. The distortions around them slow. No more flickering trees. No more warping stones. The wind blows normally for the first time in days. A few yards away, Trisha stands. But she is no longer flickering. She is stable. Not glowing. Not fading. Not translucent. Stable. Alive. She walks toward Edward slowly. Her steps make sound again. Edward's hands tremble just once. Alphonse breathes in deeply. Solid, real, grounded. Trisha reaches Edward. She places a hand on his face. This time, her hand is warm. And it has a heartbeat. She speaks softly. "I am not the woman who died. But I am living now. And I am real enough." Edward's voice is low. "Are you staying?" She nods once. "As long as I was meant to." No longer a forced resurrection. No longer a stolen remainder of a past life. She is not an imitation now. She is a person living in the present, not a memory recovered from the past. She exists. Not because alchemy allowed her to, but because Edward finally let her. Hohenheim watches her with quiet grief and relief tangled together. "You're not Trisha," he says softly, "but you're something she would have been proud to become." She smiles gently. "Then let the world accept me as I am." Mustang steps forward. "Then it's over?" Hohenheim shakes his head. "No. It's stabilized. But it's not over." Alphonse looks at Edward. He sees it now. Edward is standing normally. But the air around him ripples just slightly, like faint distortions, not of matter, but meaning. Edward is restored. But he is not the same. Mustang notices. "Your presence feels different." Edward nods. "Truth didn't take my life. It took something harder to live with." Alphonse asks, "What did it take?" Edward looks toward the horizon. He answers quietly, "It didn't take anything. It gave." Alphonse frowns. "Gave." Edward nods slowly. "It gave me awareness. Permanent awareness." Mustang asks, "Of what?" Edward breathes out. "Of every moment everything could break. Of every possible imbalance. Of every place where the world is holding itself together." Trisha watches him, quietly worried. Edward continues. "I can feel when nature struggles to preserve order. I can sense where balance has been strained. Not perfectly. Not like truth. But enough to know what it means to keep the world from falling apart." Alphonse stares. Then the cost wasn't just giving up something. Edward nods softly. "It was learning to live with the one thing I always tried to avoid." Alphonse whispers, "Responsibility." Edward nods again. Truth's voice echoes faintly through him, not spoken, yet remembered. "The price of arrogance is not disappearance." It is awareness. And the cost of knowledge is living with it. Mustang speaks carefully. So you have this burden forever? Edward nods. Yes. Alphonse asks, will it hurt? Edward answers, only when I try to forget it. The wind blows normally. Birds fly in the correct direction. No time skips. No distortion. No flickering. For the first time since the transmutation succeeded, the world feels normal. Tricia steps closer, placing a hand on Edward's shoulder. You will still live, Edward. Pain doesn't erase life. It reminds us we're living it. Edward smiles faintly, not with relief, but with acceptance. He finally says the words he once believed but never understood. A lesson without pain is meaningless. He pauses, but pain without meaning is just punishment. He looks at Alphonse. What we just lived was meaning. Alphonse nods, eyes warm. Mustang speaks. Then the world continues. Hohenheim adds quietly, balanced for now. They turn from the clearing. The transmutation site lies silent. Not dead. Not sacred. Just empty. The way it was meant to be. Aftermath in resemble. Edward begins sensing imbalance. Mustang considers his role. Subtle dark ending foreshadowing. In the days that follow, life in resemble slowly returns to normal, or as close to normal as possible after reality has nearly fractured. Tricia Elric lives quietly. She breathes. Her heart beats. She feels pain, warmth, hunger, and sorrow. She is no longer the memory-born echo they forced into existence. She is not the Tricia who died. She is the Tricia who lives now. Pinocchio watches her with cautious acceptance. She does not treat her as an anomaly. She treats her as a woman who has survived a storm. Edward repairs the porch outside their home. He works in silence. When he places each nail, he hesitates slightly, as if sensing whether the wood will accept it. Once, he stops mid-strike and steps back, adjusting his aim by less than a degree. Alphonse observes. You felt something. Edward answers softly. Yes. Attention. The board was resisting pressure that wouldn't have shown until next winter. Alphonse nods slowly. You can sense fracture points. Edward continues working. Only where the world is straining to hold itself together. Later that afternoon, Winry arrives from Rush Valley. She is nervous. She brings tools and medical equipment, not for repair, but for reassurance. She walks into the house and sees Tricia alive. She freezes. Tricia smiles softly. Hello, Winry. Winry stares at her hands before speaking. I watched you die. Tricia nods gently. You did. Winry looks to Edward. And now you're here. Tricia replies. Not as I was. But I am here now. Tears fill Winry's eyes. Is that real? Edward answers. Yes. She wipes her face. Then that's enough. Outside, Mustang and Hawkeye wait a short distance from the house. Mustang watches the sky. The distortions have ceased. Reports across Central confirm stability. Hawkeye responds. So it's over? Mustang studies the wind. Not exactly. Reality is holding because the correction anchored itself to the boy. Hawkeye glances at Edward through the window. He looks unchanged. Mustang replies, that's what makes it dangerous. He carries it now. He pauses. His presence may become essential. She nods. But using him could unbalance him. Mustang's expression darkens. We won't use him. We'll watch over him. That evening, Edward sits by the window. He notices small imbalances, the weight of a glass incorrectly distributed, the slight miscalculation in how slowly a candle would burn. He can see the points where entropy would one day demand correction. He does not act on every one. He chooses carefully. Alphonse enters. Do you feel it all the time? Edward nods. Not all of it. Only when something's close to breaking. Alphonse sits beside him. Does it hurt? Edward thinks for a moment. Not physically, but I feel it here. He touches his chest. Like it won't let me rest. Alphonse looks at him carefully. Are you all right with living like that? Edward answers, I'm not all right with it. He looks out the window. But I accept it. Alphonse nods once. Then I'll live beside you so you don't carry it alone. Edward smiles faintly. I'd like that. That night, Hohenheim stands alone near the original transmutation site. He senses residual energy dissipating across the soil. He closes his eyes. You paid more than I could have. The wind rustles silently, almost respectfully. He whispers, I hope the world remembers the balance you protected, even if it never remembers you almost broke it. In Central, Mustang writes a classified document under a codename only he will recognize. Operation Equilibrium Monitor. He notes. Subject, Edward Elric. Observation, displays anomalous awareness of structural, temporal, and energetic imbalance within environment. Risk, unknown. Potential, vital. Hawkeye watches him writing. Will you contact him? Mustang replies, no. Not until necessary. She nods. And if necessary? He answers, then I will not ask him to act. I will ask if he is willing. Meanwhile, Trisha watches her sons from the doorway. They sit beneath the stars. She senses something they do not say. Edward speaks quietly. Al, there's something else truth showed me. Alphonse listens. Edward continues, the correction stabilized, but it didn't end. As long as I exist, balance holds. If I ever try to erase what I've done, if I try to live without acknowledging it. He pauses. The world will begin to break again. Alphonse breathes in. So the price isn't paid once. It's paid every day. Edward nods. Yes. Neither speak for some time. Then Alphonse asks, will you ever hate it? Edward looks at him. His eyes are clear. Some days, I will hate it. But hating it won't change that it's mine. Alphonse places a hand over Edward's. Then when those days come, I'll remind you why you accepted it. Edward nods silently. In the distance, the sky shifts, just slightly. No anomaly forms. Instead, a single star moves to correct its trajectory, without disturbance. The world, for now, aligns itself. Edward watches. Balance, he whispers. For the first time since entering the gate, he exhales without tension. The night passes peacefully. But far away, beyond the visible horizon, in a place where the gate is silent, something observes. Not in urgency, but in patience. Knowing that every correction carries the seed of another deviation. And that the soul who holds balance now may someday struggle to bear it. Morning rises over Resemble with unusual stillness. Not the unstable silence from before, this is natural quiet. Birds sing without distortion. Wind moves without resistance. The world feels whole again. Edward walks toward the water well behind the house. He draws a bucket. The rope tension feels correct. He observes the droplets fall precisely as physics dictates. He nods once, silently acknowledging stability. But as he turns away, the handle creaks, an ordinary sound, but Edward feels it differently. Not wrong, simply weakening. He senses where, years from now, wood will split from rain exposure. Not catastrophe. Not imbalance. Just decay. Natural. He breathes out and allows it to remain unrepaired. Alphonse approaches. You could prevent that. Edward replies. I could. But fixing everything stops the world from choosing how to break. He looks at the horizon. Some things aren't meant to be corrected early. He turns to his brother. Balance isn't perfection. It's acceptance. Later that day, Mustang summons Edward discreetly to Central. Alphonse remains in resemble with their mother. Edward travels by train. Throughout the journey, he notices momentary dissonances, a wheel that will eventually wear thin, a bolt slightly loose from manufacturer oversight. He allows each to remain untouched. He arrives at Central Command. Mustang stands by the window, looking at a city that now functions normally. Full Metal, Mustang says, though Edward doesn't carry that title in this timeline. It is recognition, not rank. Edward replies, Colonel. Mustang gestures toward a chair. We've stabilized beyond projected recovery rate. Variables reduced. Distortion patterns ceasing. But there's one factor still undefined. Edward sits calmly. Me. Mustang nods. You're an anomaly that prevents anomalies. Edward answers, or one that could cause them again. Riza Hawkeye speaks from behind Mustang. You hold equilibrium by understanding what forced imbalance feels like. Edward looks at her. And what it cost. Mustang leans forward. I don't intend to use you. I need to know if you can live with what you carry. Edward thinks before responding. Truth said this awareness will never leave. Some days, it will feel like weight. Other days, like clarity. Mustang asks, Are you afraid of resentment? Edward answers, Only if I forget why I accepted it. Mustang studies him. And if one day, you decide responsibility is too heavy? Edward pauses. I won't make that choice. Mustang responds quietly. No one ever plans to. There is silence. Riza watches Edward closely. And if one day, the world tries to use you again? As a weapon? Or as an excuse? Edward nods. Then the knowledge I carry becomes dangerous, not healing. Mustang stands. Which is why I won't tell anyone what you did. Edward meets his gaze. And if they find out? Mustang replies, then the world must decide whether to trust the one who broke it, or the one who repaired it. Edward stands. And if they choose neither? Mustang finishes the thought. Then they'll learn what reality does when balance is ignored. Edward walks to the door. He pauses. Colonel, if one day I become the imbalance rather than the correction. Mustang interrupts. That day, Full Metal, you won't face it alone. Edward nods once and leaves. Outside Central Command, Edward steps into the city streets. He passes crowds unaware of how close they came to collapse. He listens to conversations, footsteps, life happening without distortion. It feels lighter. Then, for a moment, the air shifts. Not dangerously, just a tremor of possibility. A small boy trips on uneven pavement. As he falls, Edward instinctively steps forward. Not to catch him, but to adjust the stone underfoot just enough so the boy lands without injury. The mother thanks him. Edward nods politely. He does not explain that if the boy had landed 2 centimeters differently, his wrist would have fractured, leading to a delay that would indirectly affect a distant railway timing weeks later. An imbalance too small to matter now, but one that may have echoed. He doesn't need to explain. He simply helps. That night, Edward returns to resemble. He finds Alphonse reading under the porch light. Alphonse looks up. How was Central? Edward sits beside him. It's stable. For now. Alphonse nods. And you? Edward pauses. Balancing. Alphonse studies him. Brother, do you think perfect balance is natural? Edward looks at the stars. No. Perfect balance is unnatural. It must be forced. And forcing balance is the same mistake we made before. Alphonse asks, then what do we protect? Edward answers softly. Not perfection. Stability. Alphonse considers the words. So the world doesn't need to be flawless. Just alive. Edward nods. Exactly. They sit in silence. From inside the house, Trisha watches through the open door. She whispers to herself. He carries it quietly, like his father did. The wind moves gently, naturally. But far away, in a place without direction, truth observes. Not in judgment, in curiosity. It whispers without voice. There was another choice he could have made. A second silhouette flickers beside it, a vision of the darker path, where Edward rejects the weight and collapses into the same arrogance that caused the break. Truth does not interfere. One day, it reflects, he may still make that choice. And if he does, that will be another story. The silhouettes fade. For now, the world remains balanced. But balance is not certainty, only responsibility. Several days pass in quiet routine. Edward repairs farm tools, helps with minor structural fixes, and studies alchemical theories without attempting any high-risk procedures. His actions seem ordinary. His intent is not. He moves through his home with precision, steps aligned to structural weight bearings, hand placements chosen to avoid unnecessary strain on objects. Most people don't notice. Alphonse does. During breakfast, Trisha pours tea. Edward subtly shifts the cup before the liquid reaches the rim, preventing a minor spill that could have followed into a slip, then into a chain of avoidable inconvenience. Alphonse watches. Edward doesn't acknowledge the moment. Later, while walking through the village, Edward observes a worker lifting an improperly balanced crate. He steps forward, adjusts the worker's grip, then walks away before being thanked. He doesn't do it out of kindness. He does it because balance demanded intervention. That evening, sitting alone at the edge of the Elric property, he stares into the quiet field. Alphonse approaches. "Brother." Edward doesn't react initially. Alphonse sits beside him. "You're correcting things without thinking." Edward replies, "Not correcting, preventing breakpoints." Alphonse considers the words. "How often do you feel them?" Edward answers after a long pause. "All the time." Alphonse turns. "Does it ever stop?" Edward hesitates. "No." Alphonse looks at the field. "Can you ignore them?" Edward shakes his head. "Ignoring them would be the same as denying what I accepted." Alphonse asks quietly, "And if one day the imbalance is inside you?" Edward closes his eyes. "It already is." Silence settles. Elsewhere, Mustang observes altered behavior patterns among high-ranking officers responding to recent stability. Certain individuals interpret the restored equilibrium as a sign that military expansion is once again viable. Mustang recognizes the danger. He writes in a private log, "If balance becomes an excuse for ambition, the boy's burden could transform into a weapon. Watch carefully." Hawkeye asks him, "Do you believe Edward might become the next source of instability?" Mustang responds, "He carries the repair. But those who would use him could become the cause." Meanwhile, Hohenheim remains in Resemble temporarily, studying the area. He observes Edward's micro-adjustments. He does not interrupt. One night, Hohenheim finds Edward alone beside the well. "You feel it everywhere," Hohenheim says. Edward nods. "You fear missing one," Hohenheim continues. Edward responds, "Yes." Hohenheim asks, "Do you fear causing one again?" Edward's voice is quiet. "Every moment." Hohenheim looks toward the field. "Then your struggle is no longer with truth. It is with yourself." Edward grips the well's edge. Hohenheim steps closer. The world is not meant to remain perfectly aligned. It moves by tension, disrupts, learns, adapts. If you remove all imbalance, you remove growth. Edward asks, "So what should I do?" Hohenheim answers, "Choose which moments to let fall apart." Edward turns to him. "What if I choose wrong?" Hohenheim responds, "Then you learn. That is balance." Edward looks down at his hands. "The gate didn't take my future," he says. "It gave me the awareness to fear it." Hohenheim kneels beside him. "Fear is not failure. Fear is caution. Failure becomes inevitable only when fear dictates your choices. Edward looks toward the house, where Alphonse and Tricia talk quietly. I don't want to break anything else. Hohenheim answers, then you must learn the difference between preserving and controlling. Edward clenches his fists. If I stop correcting imbalance, people could suffer. Hohenheim replies, some suffering is necessary. It creates meaning. Edward's expression hardens. That was what I didn't accept before. Hohenheim nods. Then accept it now. Edward breathes deeply. I will try. Hohenheim places a hand on his shoulder. Trying is balance. That night, Alphonse watches his brother sleep for the first time since the gate. Edward lies quietly. Even in sleep, his brow is mildly strained, as if sensing subtle shifts in pressure. Alphonse whispers, if balance one day becomes too heavy. He closes the window. I'll remind you that you're allowed to be imperfect too. Outside, the wind moves gently. Far away, within the silent dimension where truth exists without form, the alternate path pulses. A vision where Edward rejects responsibility, forcing equilibrium into submission rather than acceptance. Truth observes both possibilities. It is not yet chosen, it reflects. If he continues to accept the weight, the world lives. If he ever refuses it, the world breaks. The silhouette waits. Not in threat, in inevitability. Somewhere inside Edward's dreams, a faint voice whispers, equilibrium lives only when accepted, and dies when demanded. Edward shifts in his sleep. As morning approaches, the world remains whole, but only because someone now understands what it means to let it be. Several days pass with relative calm. The world remains stable. Weather follows predictable patterns. Machinery operates without distortion. Crops grow normally again. For most people, reality has resumed without memory of the near collapse. For Edward, every breath remains measured. He walks through resemble with steady steps. When he enters the workshop, he pauses before crossing the threshold, just long enough to confirm the floorboard beneath his foot will hold without triggering structural strain. He doesn't need to think about it. Awareness has become instinct. That morning, Alphonse joins him beneath the awning where Edward calibrates structural supports. Alphonse places a small wooden beam on the table. Let it break, Alphonse says. Edward looks at him. Why? Alphonse answers calmly. Because not every fracture needs prevention. Edward hesitates. The grain pattern shows a weak line. He could reinforce it with minimal effort. The fracture would occur under prolonged pressure, but no lives would be affected. Still, his instinct pushes for correction. Alphonse watches him. You need to learn where to allow failure. Edward's eyes lower to the beam. I know. Alphonse shakes his head. You understand. But you haven't accepted. Edward remains silent. Finally, he sets the beam aside, unfixed. Alphonse nods. That's the first step. Later, Edward walks past the riverbank. A stone shifts under his boot. He instinctively reaches out with his awareness, sensing the coming erosion pattern. He pauses and deliberately steps back, allowing it to move. Water shifts accordingly. He watches the distortion dissipate naturally. He exhales. That evening, Mustang arrives unannounced. He does not bring military escort. Only Hawkeye accompanies him. They join Edward and Alphonse at the edge of the property. Mustang looks at Edward. I won't ask about what you feel. I already know the answer. Edward nods. Then why are you here? Mustang replies, to prevent the world from using you again. Edward studies him. How? Mustang gestures toward the hills. You carry a burden the government would try to exploit if they ever understood it. So we'll ensure they never do. He pauses. And if someone suspects, I'll be there before they reach you. Edward responds. You don't owe me that. Mustang's tone remains steady. No. But I owe the world the chance it got because of you. Riza adds, and responsibility doesn't belong to one person alone. Not anymore. Alphonse steps beside Edward. He's not carrying it alone. Edward looks between them. The ground beneath him feels level, balanced, not because of his awareness, but because of shared intent. Mustang speaks softly. One more thing. I need you to consider joining an unnamed advisory branch. Quietly. No paperwork. You wouldn't act. Just sense. Edward asks, you want me to watch for imbalance? Mustang answers, I want you to know there's a place to report what you feel, so you don't shoulder it in isolation. Edward considers this. If I notice something wrong, I won't wait for permission to act. Mustang smirks faintly. I never expected you to. They exchange a simple nod. That night, Edward returns indoors. Tricia sits at the table. She smiles softly. How heavy is it today? She asks. Edward pauses before answering. Manageable. She studies his expression. That means it hurts. Edward responds quietly, only because I still care. She reaches across the table and places her hand over his. Real. Steady. Then it's still worth carrying. He looks at her. There is no flicker in her form. She lives because he allowed the world to accept her rather than force her upon it. Alphonse watches silently from the doorway. He senses that his brother's greatest challenge is not maintaining balance, but trusting himself to coexist with it. Outside, the stars trace predictable paths. For a while. But deep in the silent void beyond the gate, truth reappears before a second silhouette, one formed from possible outcome. A version of Edward whose awareness evolves into control. A version who forces rather than reads balance. A version whose fear becomes dominance. Truth observes both EDS. The difference between balance and control, truth whispers, is acceptance. The darker Edward steps forward in vision. His eyes lack the softness of the one who returned. Truth watches quietly. One day, it reflects, he may believe balance requires mastery rather than harmony. If that day arrives, it does not finish the sentence. It does not need to. Edward awakens from sleep and sits upright. He senses nothing wrong. Yet he remembers the gate, and remembers that the possibility of failure lives inside understanding. He breathes in, then returns to rest. Alphonse watches him and whispers, "We'll remind you of the difference." Silence. For now, the world holds. The test comes sooner than anyone expects. 3 weeks after the world steadies, a late-season storm rolls toward resemble. The clouds build higher than usual, stacking in unnatural layers for a rural sky. Most villagers see only incoming rain. Edward feels something else. He stands alone at the edge of town, watching the forming wall of gray. The wind presses against his skin with a strange rhythm, accelerating and slowing in uneven intervals. He closes his eyes and listens. The storm is natural. The pattern inside it is not. He senses an imbalance, not catastrophic, but amplified. A simple thunder system choked with more energy than its structure should safely hold. Lightning will strike more frequently. Floodlines may exceed their typical range. It is not the world breaking. It is the world straining. Alphonse approaches from behind. "You feel it." Edward nods. "Yes." "Is it like before?" Alphonse asks. Edward shakes his head. "No. Before, things were wrong at the core. Now, they're just stressed." Alphonse looks toward the incoming storm. Can it correct itself? Edward answers, "Eventually. But it might cause more damage than it should." Alphonse studies his brother's expression. "So you have to decide whether to act." Edward nods slowly. Yes. He could intervene. One well-placed alchemic adjustment in the lower atmosphere could bleed off excess pressure, redirect a portion of the storm, reduce the risk. But if he overcorrects, he forces equilibrium rather than letting nature perform its own corrections. Alphonse says quietly, "What if we treat this as an experiment?" Edward glances at him. "An experiment?" Alphonse nods. "We let some parts of it play out. We identify what is necessary strain and what is excessive. We intervene only where life is directly threatened." Edward looks back at the clouds. "Controlled imbalance." Alphonse answers, "You said balance isn't perfection. It's acceptance. Let's prove it." The first wave of rain hits at dusk. Villagers retreat indoors. Thunder rolls over the rooftops. Wind begins to howl, rattling shutters and doors. Inside the Elric house, Trisha gathers supplies, prepared for outages. Pinocchio lights extra lamps. Winry checks structural joints and roof seals. Everyone moves with purposeful calm. Edward stands near the window, eyes half closed. He senses minute stress fractures building across the village. Barn doors straining. Tree roots loosening. Water pooling in low ground. He could prevent each outcome with minimal effort. He doesn't. Not yet. Lightning strikes near the water tower. Edward feels the discharge before he hears it. The structure vibrates but holds. The imbalance disperses harmlessly. He allows it. Wind tears a small section of roof from a storage shed at the far edge of town. Grain spills into the open. Edward feels the shift and tenses. Alphonse touches his arm. "Let it go." Edward breathes out. "Someone will lose part of their harvest." Alphonse nods. "Yes. But they will learn to plan for storms. That's not collapse. It's consequence." Edward releases the urge to interfere. Then the river swells. He feels water levels rising, pressure building against the old stone bridge at the village crossing. The stones are worn, mortar eroded with age. Under normal conditions, it would survive another season. Under this storm's concentrated force, he sees it clearly. If the water rises beyond a certain point, the central support will fail. The bridge will collapse. A child who attempts to cross tomorrow will be swept away. The image is not a vision. It is a chain of probability he reads instinctively. Edward grips the windowsill. Alphonse sees it. "This one." Edward nods once. "If I do nothing, someone dies." Alphonse says, "Then this is where you act." Edward steps outside into the storm. Rain slams into his face, soaking him instantly. He walks toward the river, boots sinking into mud. The wind roars, but he hears a deeper sound beneath it, the groaning protest of structural strain. He reaches the bridge. Water slaps violently against its sides, rising inch by inch. He kneels and places a hand against the stone. The imbalance pulses through him, an old structure facing pressure beyond its design. He whispers, "I'm not here to control you, just to keep you from breaking the wrong way." He draws a circle quickly into the mud, channels energy into the underside of the central support, not to harden it beyond nature, but to redistribute stress more evenly across remaining stones. The bridge strengthens against this storm only, not against all time. Water surges. The structure shakes, but holds. The imbalance diffuses. Edward steps back, chest heaving more from tension than exertion. Alphonse arrives beside him, drenched. "You didn't reinforce it permanently." Edward shakes his head. "No. I shaped the strain. It will still age. It will still fail one day. But not like this. Not now." Alphonse smiles faintly. "That's balance." They walk back through the rain. From a distance, Mustang watches from a sheltered vantage point. He had arrived hours before, sensing through reports that the storm pattern was irregular. Hawkeye stands beside him beneath a narrow overhang. "You knew he'd respond," she says. Mustang nods. "I needed to see how." They watch Edward's behavior, decisive, but restrained. He intervened only when lives were at risk. Hawkeye observes quietly. He didn't try to tame the storm. Mustang responds. Then he's learning. He's choosing where to stand. Hawkeye's gaze hardens slightly. And if one day he chooses differently? Mustang pauses. Then we'll already be by his side when that day comes. Back in the house, the Elrics regroup. Winry towels her hair dry and scolds Edward for going out without a coat. He accepts the lecture without resistance. Trisha checks for injuries. Alphonse reports on small damages around the village. broken fences, scattered tools, a half-flooded storage shed. But no one was hurt, he says. Edward nods. That's enough. Tricia sits at the table, hands wrapped around a warm mug. Storms are part of life, she says softly. You can't stop the sky from changing. Edward answers, I know. She looks at him carefully. But you can choose when to hold the line. He meets her eyes and smiles faintly. I'm starting to understand that. Later, as the storm passes and the night quiets, Edward steps outside alone. The clouds drift apart, revealing stars. The world feels exhausted but intact. He senses residual strain, but nothing overwhelming. Nothing desperate. Behind him, Alphonse approaches. You didn't fix everything, Alphonse says, standing beside him. No, Edward answers. I let some things break. Alphonse looks at him. How does it feel? Edward considers the question. Like I'm finally sharing responsibility with the world, he says. Not trying to own all of it. Alphonse nods. That's what you couldn't accept before. Edward breathes in slowly. I think that was the Real Toll truth took. Alphonse tilts his head. Awareness. Edward shakes his head. Trust. Trusting that the world has a right to shape itself, even if it sometimes hurts. Inside, Mustang finishes drafting a short, unsigned memorandum for himself. It reads, if Edward Elric ever stops distinguishing between preservation and control, initiate contingency Ember. Not to neutralize him. To remind him he is human. He folds the paper once and locks it away. The next morning, the villagers begin repairs. They patch roofs, reinforce fences, reclaim scattered supplies. They talk about the storm as if it were only weather. For them, it was. For Edward, it was a trial. He passed it. But far beyond, in the place beyond form, Truth watches the boy walking through his mended village, carrying unseen weight with a slightly lighter step. It is possible, Truth muses silently, for one who broke the law to live in service of it. A faint echo answers from somewhere deep in the void. And it is also possible for service to become control. Truth does not deny it. The line between them is choice. Edward pauses at the threshold of his house. He feels nothing crack beneath his feet. He smiles, just slightly, and goes inside. Word of Amestris returning to stability spreads quickly through military channels. Though the core collapse was never publicly known, classified circles are aware that something significant was prevented. Some view recovery as resilience. Others see opportunity. Edward remains in resemble. For most residents, life moves normally. For him, each day is a practice of restraint. At sunrise, he repairs fencing but leaves one post deliberately misaligned by a small degree. It will lean further over time but cause no harm. He observes the imperfection and walks away. Balance accepted, without correction. Alphonse joins him carrying 2 teacups. You're getting better at leaving things alone. Edward replies, I still think about fixing them. But I think more about why I shouldn't. Alphonse sits beside him. That difference is what makes you safe. Edward nods. By mid-morning, an unmarked military vehicle arrives. Mustang steps out, followed by Hawkeye, and an unfamiliar man, official, composed, lacking Mustang's empathy. He introduces himself. Major Harold Kinzel, Special Strategic Division. His voice is direct. We've been informed you possess unique sensitivity to environmental stability patterns. I'm here to request your cooperation. Edward doesn't respond immediately. Kinzel continues. Amestris is moving into a reconstruction phase. Your abilities could help optimize nationwide infrastructure, railway load balancing, resource distribution, military readiness. Edward's voice is controlled. I don't correct systems. I understand them. Kinzel replies, awareness followed by precise adjustment could generate unprecedented efficiency. Edward looks at him. What cost? Kinzel answers, none. Optimized progress benefits all. Hohenheim, nearby, watches silently. Edward asks, if I correct stress patterns before they form, What happens when systems face pressure without intervention? Kinzel responds, we would anticipate and neutralize worst-case outcomes. Prevent unnecessary losses. Edward steps forward. By preventing their chance to learn through small failure. Kinzel raises an eyebrow. You speak of abstract philosophy. We speak of measurable gain. Mustang watches the interaction closely but remains silent, letting Edward respond on his own. Edward narrows his eyes. What happens long-term if everything is pre-optimized? Every load, every tolerance calculated before it experiences breakdown. Kinzel answers, efficiency rises. Risk lowers. Edward's tone shifts. Dependence develops. Until someone expects control instead of responsibility. And when eventual failure comes, because it always does, it collapses everything at once. Kinzel studies him. Are you refusing to assist your country? Edward doesn't blink. I'm refusing to correct what people must learn to support themselves. Silence. Kinzel glances at Mustang. You assured me he would consider this. Mustang responds evenly. I said he would listen. He did. Kinzel turns back to Edward. You have potential to serve on a national scale. Don't waste it. Edward responds quietly. Potential without humility isn't service. It's domination. Kinzel steps toward him. Do you believe you have the right to dictate what balance means for an entire country? Edward answers, no. That's why I won't do it. Kinzel's patience cracks. You would withhold what could reinforce national strength based on personal ideology? Edward steadies his voice. Balance, he says, is not something you enforce. It's something you respect. Kinzel turns sharply. Watch that tone, Elric. Alphonse steps between them calmly. He is watching his tone. And his balance. You should watch yours. Hohenheim speaks quietly. Power without limitation invites collapse. Kinzel looks at him. And what are you to this discussion? Hohenheim replies, someone who once believed control was protection. Kinzel dismisses him with a glance. This conversation isn't over. Edward replies, it is. Mustang steps forward finally. His voice is flat. Major, your request is denied. Kinzel opens his mouth to protest, but Mustang doesn't permit it. Withdraw, Mustang says. Or I make this formal. Kinzel sees the warning. He nods curtly to Edward and leaves without another word. Hawkeye remains momentarily and speaks quietly. He won't stop there. Edward nods. He doesn't need to. I made my choice clear. Hawkeye's eyes reflect quiet concern. Make sure that peace you carry doesn't turn into resistance. Edward meets her gaze. I won't fight the world to keep it from breaking. I'll remind it when it's allowed to. Hawkeye nods once and leaves. Mustang waits until they're alone. That decision you made defines the two paths before you. Edward asks softly, what paths? Mustang looks directly at him. One where you accept balance, and one where you enforce it. There is silence. Edward looks toward the village. Then down at his hands, the same hands that corrected the bridge during the storm. The same hands that once tried to rewrite the rules for the sake of those he loved. He closes them slowly. Alphonse watches. You're still choosing every day, Alphonse says. That's how I know which path you're on. Edward looks up. How? He asks. Alphonse smiles faintly. Because the day you stop asking if you're right is the day I know you've chosen wrong. Edward breathes out. Mustang nods once, then walks away. Edward watches him leave, then turns back to the empty road. He feels nothing in the soil beneath his feet. No distortion. No ripple. Just weight. Just choice. He stands still. Then continues walking. The ground stays level. For now. Several weeks later, Edward receives a discreet summons from Central. Not an order. A request. Signed by Mustang, with a single additional line beneath his name. I won't ask you to fix everything. Just to see. Edward shows the note to Alphonse. Will you go? Alphonse asks. Edward folds the paper. If he's calling me, something's straining. Alphonse nods. Then I'll come with you. They travel by train to Central. The city appears unchanged. Crowded streets, structured uniformity, the usual controlled chaos of urban life. But beneath it, Edward feels subtle tension, not catastrophic, not immediate, but layered. They arrive at Mustang's office. Hawkeye opens the door. Mustang stands over a map of the city, marked with pins and inked circles. He looks up. You came. Edward replies. You asked. Mustang gestures them closer. We've had rising complaints. Not of collapse. Of friction. He taps the map. Minor disruptions in supply routes. Delays in non-essential services. Increased civilian unrest in certain districts. Nothing individually dangerous. Together, they signal strain. Edward studies the map. He doesn't need to be told where the stress points are. He feels them before Mustang finishes speaking. Alphonse asks, what do you want us to do? Mustang leans back. I want to know if this is normal societal pressure, or if it's the beginning of something dangerous. Edward closes his eyes briefly. Noise fades. He focuses on the patterns, trade routes, work cycles, housing density, food distribution. He senses bottlenecks, places where efficiency is failing, not because of natural limitation, but because of mismanagement and greed. He opens his eyes. This isn't the world straining, Edward says. This is people choosing badly. Mustang nods slightly. That's what I suspected. Alphonse asks, is anyone in danger? Edward shakes his head. Not now. They're frustrated. Tired. But this isn't collapse. It's consequence. Mustang watches him carefully. Can you fix it? Edward answers, yes. If I redistribute transit routes, adjust loading schedules, compensate for shortages before they're felt, these tensions would ease. People would feel the system working again. Mustang asks quietly, should you? Edward doesn't answer immediately. He looks at the map again. Each mark represents discomfort, not death. Each inefficiency represents waste, not ruin. He can envision the corrected version, streams of balanced flow, optimized movement, quiet streets. He can also see something else. A city dependent on an unseen hand. If I fix this, Edward says slowly, they'll never know they were the cause. They'll assume the system corrected itself. And then they'll repeat the same patterns until one day the strain is too large for subtle adjustments. Alphonse listens in silence. Mustang folds his arms. So you're saying we let it hurt? Edward replies, we let it teach. Mustang's gaze is steady. Where's the line between letting the world learn and abandoning the people in it? Edward looks at him. When their suffering becomes irreversible. This isn't that. This is discomfort. It can wake them up. Mustang smirks faintly. You sound like someone who's been through it. Edward answers, I'm someone who broke the world trying to avoid it. Hawkeye speaks for the first time. What if the tension grows? If uncorrected, pressure can become violence. Edward nods. Then I'll know. And that's when I step in. Not now. Mustang studies him. You understand that choosing not to intervene is still a choice with consequences. Edward nods. Yes. Balance isn't stepping in or staying out. It's knowing when each matters. Mustang taps the map once. Then we monitor. Quietly. If this evolves beyond friction into real danger, I'll inform you. Until then, we leave it to the people to change what they've created. Alphonse watches Edward carefully. Later, outside Central Command, he asks, Did you want to fix it? Edward walks in silence for a moment. Yes, he says. Part of me did. It would have been easy, satisfying, even. Seeing improved flow, relaxed tension, smoother systems. Alphonse asks, why didn't you? Edward replies, because that's the path I saw in the gate. Alphonse looks at him. What path? Edward stops at the top of the steps, looking down over the city. The version of me who decided the world needed his guidance at every turn. The version who believed that if he didn't intervene, chaos would win. Alphonse's voice is soft. And you don't believe that? Edward answers, I believe the world will struggle. But struggle isn't chaos. It's growth. They walk through the streets as evening falls. Candlelight glows in windows. People argue, laugh, trade, complain. Nothing is perfect. Nothing is collapsing. Near a crowded market, Edward feels a spike in tension, an overloaded vendor cart, poorly balanced, about to tilt. If it falls, traffic will stall. Tempers will flare. Someone might get hurt in the rush. He moves instinctively. But this time, he doesn't change the cart. He steps beside the vendor. That axle is going to give under the weight, Edward says calmly. Shift your crates. And reinforce this side. The vendor frowns. How do you know? Edward shrugs. I've seen it before. The man adjusts, following the advice. The strain disperses. The accident never happens. Alphonse smiles. You didn't fix it for him. Edward replies. No. I just showed him how to hold it himself. They continue walking. That night, Mustang writes a brief note and locks it with his personal seal. Subject, Edward Elric. Status, remains aligned with acceptance-based equilibrium. Continues to distinguish between preservation and control. Risk, present. Trust, present. He sets the paper aside. In Resemble, Trisha waits on the porch as the brothers return days later. She embraces them both. Edward feels the familiar warmth of her. Real. Grounded. How was Central? She asks. Edward smiles faintly. Learning. She tilts her head. You, or them? He answers. Both. That night, Edward steps outside alone. The sky above Resemble is clear. No storm. No distortion. No dramatic sign. Just stars. He listens. He feels small imbalances, a weak fence post, a loose stone, a misaligned hinge. He lets them be. Inside his mind, the memory of the gate remains. Of truth. Of the other path he might have walked. A voice echoes faintly, not from outside, but from within. You chose to live with the weight, not wield it. He exhales. For now, he replies quietly. Because he knows this isn't a choice made once. It's a choice made every day. And every day he answers the same question. Will you serve balance, or control it? Tonight, his answer is clear. He turns back toward the house. The ground remains level. The next true test does not come from storms, or cities, or the slow grind of politics. It comes from something smaller. One morning, Trisha does not rise at her usual time. Edward knocks on her door. Mom. No answer. He opens it gently. She lies in bed, eyes open but unfocused, breathing shallow. Her skin is warm, but her movements are slow. Not distorted like before. Just tired. Mom. Edward moves to her side. She smiles faintly. I'm just a little dizzy. Alphonse rushes in. What's wrong? Trisha answers, nothing out of balance. Just a body that's been through more than it should have. Edward places his hand on her wrist. He feels her pulse, weak, but natural. No anomalies. No delay between breath and heartbeat. No flicker at the edges of her form. Yet something inside him recoils. He remembers the night they transmuted her. The violation. The stolen second chance. The near destruction that followed. He hears a whisper in the back of his mind. You could correct this. He stands up abruptly. Alphonse notices. Brother. Edward walks to the window, gripping the frame. His awareness reaches beyond the room, testing for imbalance, distortion, signs that this weakness is a ripple of their past mistake. He finds none. She is not collapsing because of broken law. She is simply human. Alphonse steps beside him. Is it happening again? Edward shakes his head. No. This isn't that. This is normal. The word feels heavier than it should. Normal. Trisha laughs softly from the bed. You two look more worried than I feel. Edward turns. You can't stand without help. She answers, people get sick, Edward. It happens. He clenches his jaw. Not to you. Not again. Her gaze softens. You're not protecting balance right now. You're protecting yourself from losing me. Silence fills the room. Alphonse looks at Edward. Brother, he says gently, this isn't the universe. This is life. They call a doctor from the village. He examines her carefully. Exhaustion, he says. She needs rest. Her heart is stable. Her lungs are clear. There's nothing unnatural here. Edward asks for details. Heart rate, blood pressure, reflex response. The doctor answers each without concern. When he leaves, he adds, she's strong. She will recover. Edward hears the words, but his chest remains tight. That night, he sits alone at the table, a lamp burning low. His journal lies open before him. He stares at a blank page. Alphonse enters quietly. You haven't written anything. Edward doesn't look up. If I write it, it becomes real. Alphonse sits across from him. It already is. Edward's voice is low. When we broke the world, I told myself I was doing it for her. To keep her from dying. To escape pain. He closes his eyes. Now that I can feel where things break, I can't stand the thought of letting it happen again. Alphonse replies, but you know the difference now. There's a world of difference between natural loss and forced imbalance. Edward grips the pen. Knowing doesn't make it easier. Alphonse answers, it's not supposed to. Edward finally writes a single line. Trisha Elric, fatigue without anomaly detected. His hand shakes as he adds, no correction required. He stops. He cannot bring himself to write the last word. Accepted. Alphonse reaches across the table and presses his hand over the page. You don't have to accept it tonight, he says. You just have to not fight it. Edward looks at him. And if I can't? Alphonse meets his eyes steadily. Then that's when balance turns into control. And that's when I stop you. Edward stares at him. The words hurt. They also steady him. He breathes out slowly. You'd really stand in my way? Alphonse answers, if you tried to break the world again, yes. Even if you told yourself it was for her. Edward's shoulders drop. Good, he says quietly. Because I don't trust myself with that choice alone. The next day, Trisha is still weak, but better. She sits up with support, sips water, speaks without strain. Her body fights for itself, without interference, without hidden distortion. Edward watches every breath. Not to measure it, to allow it. Later, he walks to the hill where the old transmutation circle once lay. The soil is undisturbed. Grass grows evenly. There is no trace of the lines that nearly destroyed everything. He kneels. I could still do it, he says quietly to no one. I could still try to fix every weakness, every illness, every misstep. I could still believe I know better than the world. He closes his eyes. And that's why I won't. The air around him is still. No gate opens. No voice answers. Instead, the breeze moves through the grass, gentle and ordinary. Far away, Mustang receives a short message from the local doctor in Resemble. Standard health report, nothing abnormal. He reads it and relaxes slightly. Hawkeye notices something important. Mustang replies, just confirmation that the world is allowed to be fragile without breaking. She understands who he means without asking. That evening, Tricia calls Edward and Alphonse to her room. She looks tired, but her eyes are bright. You both tried to carry more than you should have, she says. You still do. But I want you to understand something. They listen. You can't protect me from being human, she says. You can't protect each other from it either. Edward looks away. I know. She smiles. Do you? He doesn't answer. Alphonse speaks instead. We're learning. She nods. Good. Because if you ever try to take away pain entirely, you'll take away meaning with it. Edward finally responds. I tried that once. She touches his hand. You survived the lesson. Now live it. That night, Edward steps outside again. The stars watch silently. He thinks of the other path, the one truth showed him. The version of himself who would have gone back to the gate, again and again, trading pieces of the world for his idea of peace. He whispers to the sky, I won't be him. Inside, Alphonse sits near their mother's bed, reading aloud from an old book. She smiles and listens, her breathing slow but natural. In the silent space beyond form, Truth observes all of it. The boy at the hill, the brother at the bedside, the woman who now exists not as an error, but as a living being with a finite span. It is difficult, Truth muses, to accept that some things must end. But he is learning. In another possibility, flickering faintly at the edge of perception, the darker Edward stands before the gate once more, demanding power in the name of protection. Truth watches both. For now, one of them remains only a shadow. The other walks beneath a real sky. Edward turns back toward the house, feeling the soft pull of gravity, the minor imperfections of the earth, the quiet strains of a world that is not flawless, but alive. He smiles faintly. For the first time, the weight on his shoulders feels less like punishment, and more like a promise. Tricia's strength returns slowly over the next week. She moves from bed to chair, from chair to porch, from porch to short walks along the path outside the house. Each step is measured, but her body responds properly. No flickers. No delays. Only the fatigue of a human who has carried more than most. Edward walks beside her the first few days, hovering too close. She laughs quietly. If you walk any nearer, she says, I'll trip over you instead of the stones. He takes half a step back. I'm just making sure that I don't disappear again, she finishes gently. He doesn't answer. She stops and leans on the railing, looking out over the fields. If I had vanished, she says, it wouldn't have been because you failed to protect me. It would have been because I was never meant to return in the first place. But you are here, he says. She smiles. Yes. And I intend to stay until the moment I'm meant to go. Not a second longer. Not a second sooner. He looks at her, hearing the weight behind the words. She isn't promising forever. She's promising something harder. A natural end. That afternoon, Alphonse sits with Edward beneath the shade of the old tree. Do you still feel the world pulling at you? Alphonse asks. Edward nods. Always. Like a map I can't stop reading. Alphonse looks at the sky between branches. Do you ever wish you could turn it off? Edward answers honestly. Yes. But if it turned off, that would mean one of two things. He counts them quietly on his fingers. Either the world doesn't need balance anymore. He lifts the second finger. Or I've stopped caring about it. Alphonse nods slowly. And you won't accept either. Edward leans back against the trunk. What about you, Al? Do you ever wish you felt it too? Alphonse thinks for a moment. Sometimes. It would make it easier to understand what you're carrying. He smiles faintly. But then I remember my job. Edward glances over. Your job? Alphonse nods. Someone has to see the world without weight. Clearly. If we both felt it, who would remind us that life is more than calculation? Edward looks at him for a long moment. That's not just a job, he says quietly. That's trust. Alphonse shrugs. Then I'll carry that. In Central, Mustang begins to formalize something he never puts into writing. A quiet network of people who understand enough to act, but not enough to try to control. Trusted officers, doctors, civil workers, a few sharp-eyed civilians, spread across Amestris. None of them know the full story. They only know this. If they hear the name Edward Elric in a context that sounds like exploitation, they contact Mustang immediately. No paperwork. No record. Hawkeye reviews the informal list. This isn't in any regulation manual, she says. Mustang answers. Neither is what he did. She nods once. Do you think he'll ever know you did this? Mustang looks at the window. I hope not. Why? She asks. Because if he finds out, Mustang says, it means someone got too close. Back in Resemble, life folds quietly into a new rhythm. Edward helps with small tasks. Alphonse studies, reads, and occasionally visits nearby towns. Tricia cooks simple meals again when she's strong enough, insisting on doing at least some work herself. She refuses to be treated like fragile glass. One evening, after dinner, she steps outside while the brothers wash dishes. She stands beneath the dimming sky, tracing constellations she learned as a child. Hohenheim joins her. You've changed, he says softly. She smiles without looking at him. I've died. Returned. Faded. Anchored. I'd hope so. He winces slightly. I'm sore. She raises a hand. Don't apologize. Not for what you didn't control. He falls silent. She continues. They broke the world for me, you know. Or they thought they did. I know, he replies. She looks at him. But the real miracle wasn't that I came back. What was it then? He asks. She nods toward the house, where Edward and Alphonse move back and forth, light spilling past them. That they learned to live with the fact that I still might go. Hohenheim follows her gaze. You realize, he says quietly, that you may not live a long life. Even now, you exist on a line between what was and what is. She nods. I don't need a long life. I need a real one. He smiles sadly. That sounds like something he would say. She smirks. Maybe he got it from me. Later that night, Edward lies awake, eyes open in the dark. Alphonse speaks from the other bed. You're thinking about it again. Edward doesn't deny it. If she gets sick again, Alphonse interrupts. Then we'll call the doctor again. Edward continues, and if one day, the doctor says she won't recover? Alphonse is quiet for a moment. Then we'll sit with her, he says softly. We'll hold her hand. We'll stay beside her. We'll let it hurt. Edward closes his eyes. And we won't go back to the gate. It is not a question. Alphonse answers. We won't go back to the gate. The silence that follows is heavy, but not empty. In a distant part of Amestris, one of Mustang's quiet contacts writes an unremarkable report about minor supply issues. He ends it with a small personal observation. People complain a lot when things are hard, but they also adapt faster than we think. Mustang reads the line and sets the report aside with a faint smile. Good, he murmurs. The world doesn't need another Edward. It needs people who learn. In the space beyond form, truth watches all of this unfold. It observes the boy who broke the law, now living each day in reluctant harmony with it. It observes the brother who promises to stop him if he ever strays. It observes the woman who lives on borrowed possibility, choosing meaning over length. Interesting, truth whispers. He fears repeating his error. Yet that fear is precisely what keeps him from doing so. From the edge of potential, the shadow of the darker Edward flickers again. Less defined now. Less solid. As if every choice made by the living one erodes its shape. Truth does nothing to banish it. Possibility must exist. But possibility is not destiny. Edward rises from bed and walks outside, unable to sleep. The night air is cool. The sky is full. The world feels fragile and strong at once. He stands in the field and listens. There are imbalances everywhere. Minor structural fatigue. Emotional tensions. Unspoken regrets. Tiny flaws in tools and habits. Misaligned expectations. Moments where reality could easily crack further than it needs to. For a moment, the old urge surges through him. The desire to fix everything. To smooth every rough edge. To protect everyone from every pain. He exhales sharply, almost a laugh. No, he says quietly. That's not balance. That's fear. He lets the imperfections stand. He turns back toward the house, feeling the earth under his feet. Not perfectly even, not perfectly firm, but trustworthy enough. As he reaches the door, Alphonse speaks from the shadows of the porch, awake. Did you hear something? Alphonse asks. Edward shakes his head. No. I heard everything. Alphonse looks at him. And Edward smiles just a little. And I decided to let it keep talking. They go inside. The night holds. The world continues. Not because someone forced it to, but because someone finally learned when not to. Seasons begin to turn. The wild urgency of the crisis months fades into something quieter. Routine, memory, slow healing. For most people in Amestris, the year will be remembered as difficult but endurable. For Edward, it will always be the year he learned how close balance and destruction truly sit. Resemble adjusts. Repairs from the storm are long finished. Fields grow. Children play in the paths. Adults argue about ordinary things, prices, weather, family trouble. Life returns to simple scales. Yet beneath that simplicity, Edward's world has changed permanently. Some days, the weight of his awareness feels lighter, almost tolerable. He can sense fracture points in structures and systems and choose consciously not to interfere. Other days, the awareness feels like a second heartbeat, louder than the first. On one such morning, Alphonse finds him sitting on the fence line, staring at nothing in particular. You're doing it again, Alphonse says. Doing what? Edward asks. Listening too hard. Edward exhales. It's all still there, Al. The misalignments. The near mistakes. The points where things could fail. I don't think that will ever go away. Alphonse leans against the post. Those things were always there. You just hear them now. Edward nods. Exactly. Alphonse asks. Do you wish you didn't? Edward considers. Sometimes. But wishing won't change it. And if I had the chance to trade it away, I'd have to ask what the cost would be. Alphonse tilts his head. Your peace. Edward shakes his head. No. Everyone else's. They fall silent. Later, a letter arrives from Central. It's short, signed by Mustang. Situation stable. Friction contained. People adapting without intervention. You were right. R.M. Edward reads it twice, then folds it carefully and places it in his journal. Not as proof that he was right, but as proof that the world can adjust without his hand. That evening, he and Alphonse walk into town. As they pass homes, Edward feels traces of tension. A couple mid-argument behind a closed door, a family struggling with financial strain, a young man on the verge of leaving for the city, torn between obligation and desire. Once, he would have thought about stepping in. Offering advice. Adjusting circumstances. Changing outcomes. Tonight, he keeps walking. Does it bother you? Alphonse asks, noticing his quiet. Yes, Edward answers. But it also reminds me that they're alive enough to feel it. They stop at the train tracks just outside the village. A freight train rattles in the distance, far from collapsing, but carrying its own strain. Weight distribution, worn wheels, slight miscalculation in cargo arrangement. Edward listens, then relaxes. "It'll hold," he says. Alphonse smiles. "You sound almost proud of it." Edward replies, "It's carrying more than it should, but it chooses to keep moving anyway." "Well," Alphonse says, "I know someone like that." Edward chuckles under his breath. Inside the Elric home, Tricia works slowly through simple tasks. She no longer pushes herself past her limits. She sits when she needs to sit, rests when she needs to rest, and lets the boys help where they can. One afternoon, she calls Edward to the table, where a small stack of old papers lies. "What's this?" he asks. "Your old notes," she says. "From before. Everything." He flips through them. Crude alchemical diagrams, early theories, scribbled attempts at understanding human transmutation. The pages smell like dust and past mistakes. "You kept these?" he asks. "I kept everything," she answers. "You were trying to understand the world. The problem wasn't that you studied. It was that you believed the world owed you an answer." He traces one of the circles with a finger. "I thought if I just learned enough, I could reach anything," he admits. Tricia watches him. "Now." He sets the pages down. "Now I think the most important part of understanding is knowing where not to reach." She nods. "Good. Then keep studying. Just differently." He raises an eyebrow. "Differently how?" She smiles. "Study the world as it is. Not only as you think it should be." That night, Edward rewrites one of his old pages from memory. He redraws a basic transmutation array, but instead of adding notes on how to push its limits, he annotates the conditions under which it should not be used. Alphonse watches over his shoulder. "You're building constraints." Edward nods. "Good alchemy isn't just about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do." Alphonse smiles. "Sounds like a different kind of power." "Yes," Edward replies. "One that doesn't need the gate to validate it." In Central, Kinzel, the major who once demanded Edward's mandatory service, sits alone in his office, reviewing recent efficiency reports. The system, strained but unaltered by supernatural intervention, has begun to smooth along predictable lines. He frowns. "Unoptimized," he mutters. He reaches for a pen, sketching possible improvements, but none of his designs feel satisfying. He imagines a version of the country where every fluctuation is accounted for, every variable neatly minimized. A world without friction. He smiles at the idea. Mustang enters without knocking. "Still chasing perfection, Major?" Mustang asks. Kinzel glances up. "Is that a problem?" Mustang walks to the window. "Perfection's boring. And extremely fragile." Kinzel scoffs. "Imperfection is waste." Mustang replies, "Imperfection is resilience. When something flawless cracks, it shatters. When something imperfect cracks, it bends and reforms." Kinzel narrows his eyes. "You sound like you've rehearsed that line." Mustang smiles faintly. "Let's just say I've seen enough gods break to know their weakness." He leaves before Kinzel can respond. Far from the politics, in a quiet moment between chores, Alphonse asks Edward a question he has been holding for weeks. "Brother," he says, "do you think I should ever take some of this from you?" Edward looks up. "Some of what?" he asks, though he knows. "The awareness," Alphonse says. "The burden. The weight. If there were a way to share it, would you want that?" Edward's face shifts through several emotions before he answers. "No," he says finally. Alphonse blinks. "No." Edward nods. "I don't want you to carry this. Not because I think I'm stronger than you, but because your job is to see clearly. If you start hearing the strain like I do, who will remind us what life looks like when it's not measured by tension?" Alphonse absorbs the words. "You really trust me that much?" he asks quietly. Edward nods. "Yes. Enough to let you tell me when I'm wrong." Alphonse smiles slowly. "Then I'll keep doing that." They fall into an easy silence. In the field beyond the house, the wind blows unevenly, tugging at grass. Edward feels the slight difference in speed from left to right. It is not perfectly balanced. He smiles. Good. Far out of reach, in the formless space beyond the gate, the shadow of the darker Edward diminishes further. Still there, still possible but weaker. Every small choice, Truth observes, is a gate of its own. It watches the boy who once stood before it and demanded power. Now, that same boy chooses restraint. Interesting, Truth says. The toll continues to be paid. Not in limbs. Not in lives. But in decisions. The universe says nothing in response. It doesn't need to. In Resemble, Edward closes his journal for the night. On the last page he has written, "Balance isn't something you reach once. It's something you choose in every moment you could break it." He places the journal on the shelf, next to tools, books, and ordinary things. Then he steps outside for fresh air. The sky is slightly cloudy, slightly clear. The ground is slightly uneven. The world is slightly flawed. He feels every bit of it. He lets it be. And for the first time since opening the gate, the weight on his shoulders no longer feels like chains. It feels like a mantle he chose to keep. Edward does not notice the exact day when fear stops being the first thing he feels. It happens gradually, almost quietly. One morning, he wakes and realizes his mind is not immediately scanning the world for potential collapse. The awareness is still there, constant, embedded, but it no longer arrives as panic. It arrives as information. That is when he understands. The toll is not fading. He is growing around it. Months pass. Mustang's quiet network settles into place. Scattered throughout Amestris, a handful of people, never in the same room, never in the same chain of command, know that if something feels wrong, in a very specific, hard-to-name way, there is a name they can pass that feeling toward. They rarely do. Most problems are human, mundane, solvable without anything supernatural. This pleases Mustang. If they hardly use the system, he remarks to Hawkeye, it means the world is learning to stand. She nods. And Edward doesn't become a crutch. One autumn, a message reaches Mustang's desk from a remote mining town. Unusual structural failures in newly built support shafts. No visible cause. Repaired beams warp within days. Cracks appear in rock faster than projected. Local alchemist detects nothing wrong with materials. Request assessment. Mustang reads it and feels a familiar chill. He writes only one line in response. Send details to Resemble. Mark as personal correspondence. The letter arrives 2 days later. Edward reads it at the table while Alphonse and Tricia prepare food. Alphonse asks, "Something serious?" Edward doesn't answer immediately. He feels the strain before he finishes the description. Rock layers misaligned, pressure accumulations hidden beneath seemingly stable strata, a network of tunnels pushing against the natural flow of the earth. "This isn't alchemy," Edward says. "It's geology being ignored." Alphonse looks at him. "Can you fix it?" Edward can see the solution clearly. Reinforced shafts, adjusted tunnel direction, pressure release pockets, controlled collapses in unoccupied zones. He could design a new layout that would disperse the strain with minimal risk. "Yes," he says. "I could." Tricia sets down a plate and listens quietly. Alphonse asks, "Should you?" Edward leans back, eyes on the letter. This is different from city friction. A tunnel collapse could kill dozens of people. They're playing with forces they don't understand. Alphonse nods. Then maybe they need guidance. Edward taps the table with a finger. "If I design their system for them, they'll never learn how to read the rock. They'll rely on distant advice instead of their own caution." Tricia speaks gently. "What if you don't give them the answer? Just the tools to find it?" Edward looks at her. She continues, "You don't have to hold the balance alone. You can teach others to feel a piece of it. In their own way." That night, Edward writes a reply. He doesn't send blueprints. He sends questions. Map your tunnels against natural fault lines. Catalog every collapse. Measure the direction of each fracture. Ask, where is the earth already moving, and how are you cutting across it? Change your shafts to follow that movement, not fight it. He adds one more line at the bottom. If you do this and still feel something wrong, I'll come. Weeks later, A second letter arrives. We followed your instructions. Fault maps completed. We adjusted direction. Controlled a small collapse where you suggested. Pressure has decreased. Cracks slowing. No casualties. We think we understand now. Thank you. Edward folds the letter slowly. Alphonse watches his face. You didn't fix it. No, Edward says. They did. He places the letter beside Mustang's earlier note in his journal. Together, they form a pattern, not of dependence, but of growth. That evening, he stands by the fence, watching the sunset bleed into the fields. Alphonse joins him. You realized something. Edward nods. I thought my choices were either intervene or stand back. I forgot there was a third option. Alphonse smiles. Teaching. Edward nods again. If more people learn to respect how things break, I won't always have to be afraid of what they'll destroy. Alphonse laughs softly. You're trying to make yourself obsolete. Edward smirks. That would be nice. In Central, Mustang receives a brief report from the same mining region. Incident resolved. Local teams adapting practices based on new recommendations. Structural failures significantly reduced. No further escalation. He sits back. Hawkeye asks, did he go there himself? Mustang shakes his head. No. He let them learn. Good, she says. Then he's still walking the right line. Mustang looks at the window, toward a horizon he cannot see. For his sake, he replies, I hope that line never disappears. Time pushes forward. Winter comes. Snow falls on resemble, softening edges, hiding imperfections beneath a temporary uniformity. Edward shovels pathways, feeling the crunch of packed snow underfoot. Beneath the white, he still senses the same old uneven boards, the same small cracks, the same flawed world. It doesn't bother him. Inside, Tricia sits near the fire, wrapped in a blanket. Her health is stable, but she tires more easily in the cold. She reads while Alphonse repairs a loose chair leg. Edward walks in, cheeks flushed from the cold. You're back, Tricia says. He nods. Paths are clear. Alphonse looks up. Everything quiet. Edward thinks for a moment. Quiet enough. Tricia smiles. Good. Then sit. He joins them by the fire. They speak of ordinary things. Harvest yields. Stories from Alphonse's books. Winry's latest letters. Mustangs rise through the ranks, slower than some would like, faster than others prefer. At one point, Tricia laughs and coughs lightly. Edward tenses. The moment passes. He relaxes. Later, when everyone else has gone to bed, he sits alone by the embers, journal open. He writes, I once believed that to protect the people I loved, I had to control the world around them. Now I understand that to truly protect them, I have to accept that the world will hurt them sometimes. My role is not to erase that. It's to make sure the hurt means something, and doesn't become everything. He underlines the last sentence. Then he closes the book. Outside, the snow continues to fall, unevenly, imperfectly, beautifully. In the formless space beyond the gate, Truth observes the boy who has, over time, paid the toll in a way few can see. Not in blood, not in limbs, not in miracles, but in choices. This, Truth murmurs, is what happens when a human learns the full cost of what they asked for. It glances toward the fading shadow of the darker Edward. Once, that shadow had been sharp. Now, it is thin, distant, more idea than threat. It still exists, Truth acknowledges. It always will. The possibility to fall is what makes walking meaningful. It looks back down at the world, a small field, a small house, a family sitting near a fire. And for now, it says, he walks. Edward steps outside one last time before sleep. The sky is clear. Stars glimmer above the snow. He listens. The world creaks, settles, strains, recovers. He smiles. Good night, he says softly, to the land, the sky, the unseen. He goes back inside and closes the door. The night holds, and balance, quietly, holds with it. Spring edges into resemble. Snow recedes slowly, leaving the ground damp and fertile. Life begins to move again, not with urgency, but with soft momentum, like a world cautiously testing strength after surviving collapse. Edward walks along the riverbank. The current is higher than usual from meltwater, flowing unevenly, carrying debris. He studies the water's motion. It strains, but naturally. No intervention required. Alphonse catches up. I've been thinking, he says. Edward glances at him. About what? The future, Alphonse replies. Before all this, I thought once our journey ended, we'd find something to chase. Knowledge, adventure, a way to define ourselves. Now, I wonder if the future is less about what we do and more about how we stay. Edward skips a stone across the water. 7 clean jumps before it sinks. Staying's harder than running, he says. Alphonse smiles. You would know. They sit beneath a budding tree. Alphonse asks, do you think you'll ever leave Resemble again? Not for emergencies, for yourself. Edward thinks. I don't know. The world feels quieter here. Easier to listen. Easier to choose not to act. But you might, Alphonse says. Edward nods. Maybe. But if I do, it'll be because I want to live, not because I feel I have to hold things together. Alphonse takes that in. You're changing. Edward replies. No. I'm finally catching up. That afternoon, Winry arrives with news from Rush Valley. She greets them with her usual energy, but something about her expression is more thoughtful than before. She hands Edward a letter. From Central. He opens it. A short note. No anomalies detected. Monitoring continues. Small disturbances present. Ordinary. Underneath, Mustang has added. If the world no longer needs you to hold it, what will you choose to do with both hands? Edward folds the letter carefully. Winry watches him. He's asking what you'll do next. Edward nods. I don't know yet. Winry smiles. Good. That means you're not rushing into an answer. Before she leaves, she pauses. Edward, if one day you don't need to listen to the world so much, would you consider building something instead of just maintaining it? He looks at her. You think I'm finally ready to create? She shakes her head. You've always been ready to create. You just used that energy to repair instead. He considers that long after she's gone. That night, Edward writes, maybe the world won't end if I build something for myself. He puts the journal away. The next morning, Tricia sits in the garden, planting seedlings. Edward helps without correcting her spacing, even though he notices minor unevenness. She glances at him. Is that gap too wide? He smiles. Maybe. Or maybe the plant will grow into it. She nods. Let it. Later, Hohenheim prepares to leave Resemble. He stands outside with his bag. You're going? Edward asks. Hohenheim nods. My work isn't finished. But yours is taking shape. Edward asks. Will you come back? Hohenheim looks toward the Elric house. One day. If I'm meant to. Edward nods. As he walks away, Hohenheim says, Edward. Edward turns. You carry balance now. But don't forget, some weight is meant to be shared, not resisted. Edward watches him go. That evening, Edward helps a neighbor reinforce a barn wall. They do it together, without alchemy. Afterward, the neighbor says, I'm glad you were here. Edward answers, Me too. As he leaves, he senses a minor imbalance in the wall. He lets it stay. It will lean, but not fall. When he returns home, Alphonse is waiting with tea. You didn't fix it, Alphonse says. Edward shakes his head. I let the wind carry the lesson. Would the old you have done that? Alphonse asks. Edward sits. No. The old me would have reinforced it so firmly it'd never bend. Alphonse stirs his tea. Even if that meant someday it would snap. Edward nods. They're quiet. Do you think, Alphonse says carefully, this awareness of yours will fade over time? It's not fading, Edward says. But it's becoming quieter. Like the world is learning to speak softer because I finally started listening gently. Alphonse nods. That sounds like balance. Edward looks at the horizon. Maybe one day, I'll stop hearing it entirely. And if that day comes, Alphonse finishes, it'll be because it no longer feels like a warning. Edward smiles. Maybe because it feels like trust. That night, under a quiet sky, Truth watches the boy who once broke the rules trying to avoid pain, now choosing to live fully within them. The toll, Truth says softly, was not the loss of something. It was the gaining of something he must choose not to use. The alternate Edward, the one who would have seized control, appears for a moment, solid enough to be seen. Then he steps back, like a reflection realizing it is no longer recognized. Truth observes. He is still possible, it says. But possibility is not destiny. The shadow fades. In Resemble, the real Edward sleeps calmly. Not without weight, but without fear. And that makes all the difference. Spring flourishes fully in Resemble. Fields bloom. The river calms. The distant scars from past storms fade beneath new growth. Life settles, not into perfection, but into a rhythm both fragile and resilient. Edward wakes early. Not from anxiety but habit. He steps outside into morning light and listens, instinctively, reflexively, to the subtle tensions beneath the surface of reality. He hears them. He acknowledges them. He doesn't feel compelled to fix them. Inside the house, Alphonse and Tricia finish breakfast. Alphonse prepares tea. Tricia waters fresh shoots on the windowsill. The quiet is profound, natural. Edward joins them at the table. Alphonse studies his face. You're calm today. Edward nods. It's easier. Not because the world is quieter, but because I am. Tricia smiles gently. Then allow yourself to rest in that. Edward finally sits without first scanning the room for flaws. That small act says more than any words could. Later, a messenger arrives with a parcel from Central. Not marked urgent. Not marked classified. Just delivered by request. Inside is a book, Principles of Applied Structural Alchemy, annotated by engineers and alchemists across multiple departments. On the first blank page is a note in Mustang's handwriting. We've begun teaching how to understand tension, not just how to reinforce it. Your influence is working. You didn't have to fix the world. You just had to let it learn. R.M. Edward runs a thumb over the ink. Winry arrives shortly after, bringing tools and stories. When she sees the book, she smiles. So they're actually integrating resilience theory into training? She asks. Edward nods. Slowly, carefully. Winry studies him for a moment. You look relieved. He exhales. I don't feel like the only one holding the rhythm anymore. That was never your job alone, she says. He looks at her. I know that now. They talk on the porch, watching clouds drift unevenly. Winry shifts the topic. You ever think about building something new? She asks. Edward glances at her. You asked me that before. And you didn't answer, she replies. He thinks carefully. I've spent most of my life reacting, solving, repairing, and... She prompts. And maybe now, he says slowly, I'm ready to create. Not to prove anything. Not to prevent collapse. Just to add something. Winry's smile widens. Good. Because I've been designing something that could use more than repairs. He raises an eyebrow. A project. She nods. A workshop. Expanded. Not just for prosthetics. A place for invention, adaptation, learning. Somewhere people can make mistakes without the world ending. He pauses. Then, genuinely, I want to help. She nods once. That's all. That evening, Edward writes. Balance is not the absence of tension. It is the ability to live with it without forcing resolution. He closes the journal. Out in the yard, Alphonse watches Trisha as she rests beneath the tree. She's better, Alphonse says. Edward nods from the steps. She still gets tired easily. But it's normal. Normal is okay, Alphonse replies. Edward looks at him. Normal means I don't have to intervene. Alphonse sits beside him. One day, he says softly, she'll slow down more permanently. Edward nods. I know. And when that happens, Alphonse starts. Edward finishes. I'll be sad. And that sadness won't mean I failed. It'll mean she mattered. Alphonse smiles faintly. That's acceptance. Edward nods. Later, he walks alone toward the old transmutation site. Grass now grows where the circle was once carved. No scar remains. He kneels. Quietly, I tried to force the world to return what it took. I thought love meant refusing to let go. Wind moves through the grass. It took years to understand that letting go doesn't mean losing. It means trusting what remains. He stands and walks away. He does not turn back. That night, the stars press gently against the darkness, unaligned, imperfect, beautiful. Inside his mind, he senses the shadow of the darker path, the version of himself who would return to the gate seeking dominion. Tonight, that possibility remains. But it feels distant, dormant, no longer beckoning. Truth observes from beyond. He learned the difference, it says, between using power to protect life and using it to deny loss. It pauses. That difference is the toll. The past need not be erased. The wound need not be closed. What matters is that he walks without reopening it. Edward sits at the table before sleep. Alphonse passes him tea. Edward asks quietly, "Do you think it's possible to live with this forever?" Alphonse considers. "I think living forever with something isn't the goal." Edward meets his eyes. "I think," Alphonse says gently, "the goal is to live well with it today." Edward nods slowly, and for the first time since stepping out of the gate, he feels, not free of the burden, not unchanged, but truly whole within it. Edward sits awake long after the lamps have been put out. The house is quiet. Trisha sleeps. Alphonse rests without stirring. But in Edward's chest, something unsettled moves, not fear, not panic. A question. He steps outside into cool night air. The sky is deep and clear. The stars look distant and unconcerned. He closes his eyes. "You're still thinking about it," he says to himself. About the gate. 4 months he has lived fully in the world, listening, choosing, accepting. Yet one thread remains untied. He left the gate on truth's terms. He paid the toll promised. But he has never gone back by choice. The thought returns now, quietly. What would it mean to face it again? Not as a desperate boy, but as someone who understands. He stands in the yard, breathing steadily. He doesn't feel pulled. He doesn't feel summoned. The world around him is stable, balanced enough. For once, the gate is not calling him. He is considering calling it. The difference matters. The next morning, he brings it up with Alphonse. They sit under the tree, shaded from the growing warmth. "Al," Edward says, "I've been thinking about going back." Alphonse tenses. "Back where?" Edward holds his gaze. "To the gate." Alphonse's expression tightens. "Why?" Edward answers carefully. "Not to ask for anything. Not to trade. To acknowledge it. To make sure there's nothing left unresolved." Alphonse stares at him for a long moment. You think talking to Truth again will change something? Edward shakes his head. Not for the world. For me. Alphonse looks at the grass between them. Do you feel unbalanced? Edward pauses. No. But I feel like I walked away with the last word unsaid. Alphonse exhales slowly. You know there's a risk. Edward nods. There's always a risk. But this time, I'm not going to bargain. I'm going to stand. Alphonse studies his brother's face. Will you promise me something? He asks. What? Edward says. If you go back, Alphonse says quietly, you don't go as someone who believes he can fix everything. You go as someone who knows he can't. Edward nods once. I promise. They sit in silence. Later, he speaks with Trisha. She listens without interrupting as he explains his awareness, the weight, the near collapse, the correction. She already knows most of it, pieced together from earlier conversations, but this time he tells it all in order, start to finish. When he finishes, he says, I want to face what I did fully. Not just live with it indirectly. I want to stand in front of truth and say I accept it. All of it. Trisha looks at him thoughtfully. Do you need the gate for that? Edward thinks. Maybe not. But it's where I ran from responsibility the first time. It feels right to return to it knowing I've stopped running. She considers that. Will you come back? She asks. He answers without hesitation. Yes. Because I'm not going to leave myself there this time. She nods, accepting his conviction. Then go, she says softly. Not to prove anything. Just to be honest. That night, Edward walks alone to the hill where the transmutation circle once was. The grass sways. The air is still. No marks remain of his first attempt or his second. He stands in the center. Last time, he called out desperately. This time, he simply speaks. I'm ready to talk. There is no sudden flash. No violent tearing of space. Instead, everything goes quiet, not unnaturally, but deeply. Sound withdraws. Wind pauses. The world holds its breath. Then the gate opens, not with force, but with recognition. A door he has already passed through once before, now appearing without malice. He steps forward. The white expanse folds around him. Inside is silence, familiar now. The featureless silhouette appears again. Truth. This time, Edward does not fall, does not scream, does not demand. He stands. You came back, Truth says without voice. I chose to, Edward replies. Truth studies him. Not in desperation. No, Edward says. In understanding. Truth circles him slowly. You carry awareness, it says. The toll has not diminished. I know, Edward replies. Why return? Truth asks. You were free to live. Edward's answer is simple. Because I wanted to say it out loud. Here. Where I once refused. Truth waits. Edward looks up into the empty brightness. I accept what I did, he says. I accept that I broke the law. I accept that I nearly ended everything to avoid losing someone I loved. I accept that the weight I carry now is fair. He breathes in. And I accept that I will never be perfect at bearing it. Truth observes. You are not here to ask for release. No, Edward says. If you took this from me, I'd forget why it mattered. Truth asks. Then what do you want? Edward answers. I want you to know I finally understand that balance is not about control. It's about choosing not to use power when power would only protect me from feeling pain. For a long moment, there is only silence. Then Truth speaks. You did not need to come here to say this. Edward nods. Maybe not. But I needed to stand where I once demanded everything, and say I know I was wrong. Truth steps closer. You have learned, it says, that the cost of your wish was not taken from you in one moment. It is extracted across a lifetime. Yes, Edward replies. Do you resent it? Truth asks. He thinks. Then, calmly, no. I regret the harm I caused. But I don't resent the lesson. Truth is quiet. You once believed you could reshape the world to protect yourself from loss, it says. Now you live in it knowing loss will come again. Edward nods. That's what makes this time real. Truth regards him. Then there is nothing more to take, it says. And nothing more to give. Edward smiles faintly. Good, he says. I wasn't asking. The white begins to thin around him. As he starts to turn away, Truth speaks one last time. Edward Elric. He pauses. Yes. You must understand this, Truth says. The possibility of your failure will never disappear. It will walk beside you as long as you live. That possibility is not punishment. It is the condition of being human. Edward nods slowly. I know, he replies. And I won't forget it. He steps backward through the gate. The light closes. The hill returns. The wind resumes. He is standing in the grass again, under the same night sky. The world feels no different. No dramatic sign of change. No vanished weight. But inside, something quiet has settled. Alphonse waits halfway down the hill, eyes searching his brother's face. Well, he asks. Edward walks toward him. It didn't take anything, Edward says. Alphonse exhales. It didn't give anything either, Edward adds. Alphonse smiles. Then why does your face look lighter? Edward thinks, then answers. Because this time, I went there as myself, he says. Not as someone trying to escape what I'd done. They walk home side by side. The path is uneven. He doesn't fix it. Morning light spills across Resemble. It's no different from any other day. That's the point. Edward wakes not to urgency, or fear, or responsibility, but simply because the sun has risen and it's time to begin living again. He dresses, steps outside, and feels the familiar texture of uneven ground beneath his feet. Not a flaw to be fixed, a reality to inhabit. The world isn't perfect. It's real. He finds Alphonse already up, tending to the garden. Tricia sits nearby with a blanket, watching the early warmth settle in. She looks tired in an ordinary way. That's enough. Edward joins them without saying anything. Alphonse senses something different. It's done, isn't it? Edward nods. Yeah. Not because I erased it. Because I faced it. What did Truth say? Alphonse asks. Edward smiles faintly. That possibility never disappears. And that's what makes the choice meaningful. Tricia watches him closely. So which choice do you make today? Edward looks out at the quiet morning. Birds stir. Wind moves gently. Somewhere, a fence creaks. Somewhere else, a board leans. I choose to live with it, he says. Not to fight it. Not to control it. Just to live. A knock comes at the door. Winry stands there, blueprint tube in hand. Edward raises an eyebrow. Starting already? Winry smirks. If you're done keeping the world from falling apart, you might as well help build something in it. He takes the tube. Inside are designs, not for repair, but for creation. A workshop. A space where failures are allowed, and lessons grow from them. Edward looks at the lines and sees small imperfections. Slight misalignments. Imperfect measurements. He rolls it back up and hands it to her. It's perfect, he says. She understands why. Later, in the workshop frame, he lifts a beam into place with Alphonse and a few neighbors. No alchemy, just manual labor. Wood creaks slightly, safe enough. Ed senses the stress inside it. He lets it stand. Winry notices. Not fixing it. Edward wipes sawdust from his hands. Doesn't need fixing. Needs time. She smiles. "You've changed." "Maybe," he says. "Or maybe I finally understand what I've been carrying." They continue working. Light shifts overhead. The earth settles beneath their feet. Edward feels the balance around him, not as something he must maintain, but as something that exists because people are learning to live within it. As afternoon fades, he steps away, hearing laughter from inside the house. Trisha's voice. Alphonse responding. Winry commenting on structural stability with exaggerated frustration. Edward looks up at the sky. No gate. No threat. Just space. A breeze passes, uneven, gentle. Truth watches, distant and silent. He finally learned, it reflects, that the world does not require perfect hands. Only conscious ones. It observes Edward for a moment longer. No further toll required, it concludes. It is being paid daily. The alternate Edward, the one shaped by control, appears dimly, no longer a looming echo but a faint outline trailing behind him. It walks a few steps, then stops. Edward does not turn toward it. He doesn't need to. He already chose. The shadow remains only long enough to acknowledge the truth that it could have been. Then it dissolves, displaced not by erasure, but by acceptance. Inside, Edward joins his family and friends. He sits, not because he is resting from weight, but because this is where he wants to be. Alphonse passes him a cup of tea. Winry discusses bolts and weight distribution. Trisha rests her head gently against the chair. Edward listens. Not to stress points. Not to imminent break. But to voices. To life. To balance. Not enforced, but allowed. And as the sun lowers and shadows extend, he realizes the world is still imperfect, still full of strain, still capable of collapse. But it is not his alone to prevent. That is what makes it worth saving. He breathes in. And for the first time since stepping through the gates so many years ago, he breathes out without bracing.